a quorum to do so.
Well,
I guess that's true.
yeah, I guess you're true. Well, maybe we'll try to do that. We'll come back
This
to it.
informal meeting order.
One more online.
Oh, what,
Okay, we
only
just
one
need
more? Who's online?
Taylor just came on.
Along with,
Will Williams and Tommy Paradise.
So I know Tanya was supposed to be joining.
Kathy, is she on here?
Yeah, Kathy's usually here.
Right in town.
I'm reporting.
Okay, well, you want to?
Oh.
I guess there's not a whole lot else to do on the
Yeah,
intro.
so 13 is our magic number, we're one short, but talking with John, we're not gonna all go home, we'll still have the discussion, I guess we just won't come to any. I guess final consensus, or we'll just discuss and then. Hit the highlights and recap at a future next meeting, right? If need be.
If need be, we don't end up having a quorum, we will revisit some of this at the next meeting when we do have a quorum and just make sure we've got consensus.
Housekeeping wise, if you need the bathroom, up that ramp, take a left, both men and women are on the right. Here's some newsworthy items.
Sure, newsworthy items. If you all have been following Water SC and the Surface Water Study Committee, that's the Legislative Surface Water Study Committee. I think since our last meeting, formal appointments have been made. On the screen there are the senators and representatives that make up this Surface Water Study Committee. They met on January 23rd. And Senator Clymer and Representative Hickson were nominated and approved as the co-chairs. They put forth a joint resolution which the committee adopted that if the General Assembly then adopts it, then it'll extend the deadline for their work to a year from now, basically, or a year and a month from now, March 2nd, 2026, to allow Water SC to complete their work. Previously, the executive order said, the study committee had to report back by March, I think. So they extended that and then they expanded the scope of the study committee. They said, shouldn't just be surface water, should be groundwater too. I guess all water resources. So I'm assuming they're going to change the name from Surface Water Study Committee to Water Study Committee or something. They asked that Water SC provide quarterly updates and that the first update come, I think, in late March or April. So Water SC will be doing that. And also at that committee meeting, Myra Reese kind of provided a quick update on what Water SC has been discussing to date in their, I think they've had 4 meetings maybe. Any questions about Water SC and this legislative committee? Okay. Just a reminder, I mentioned this last time, State Climate Office in Hope Mazel is still planning a drought tabletop exercise on March 5th. Is anybody from Climate Office on?
Not at the moment.
No, okay.
Tommy needs the password and then she'll be on and then we should have.
Oh, okay. Just holler when she gets on. We'll
I will
double back and approve the agenda. Yeah. I'm not sure if the office, Climate Office has advertised this yet. They said they're going to. They have? Okay, good. All right. So again, they're encouraging at least one person from each RBC, ideally 2 to attend. You're probably going to attend, right? Yeah, Brian, are you going to attend? Yep, so you'll have at least 2 there. Anybody else is interested, reach out to Hope. John Carmen sent me an email about something that y'all may be interested in. If you don't already get it, if you go to DNR's website, I think when you first log in, you'll get this little pop-up that says you want to receive email subscriptions. If you put your email in there and you subscribe, and one of the subscriptions you can subscribe to is this weekly. Is it weekly?
It aspires to be weekly. I can't speak for it, but
Yeah,
it's roughly. It's not really.
Not quite weekly, it's usually about maybe every other week.
Yeah.
So.
Every 11 days.
Semi-weekly, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just a nice quick summary of the week ahead, and they're showing here the US drought monitor. Do they always show the US drought monitor?
Yes, as far as I know.
Yeah, yeah.
Jeff Hines came on, so we're at 1.
Okay, good. So anyway, I wasn't subscribed to it. I am now. So thank you, John, for pointing that out. If anyone wants to subscribe to it again, just go to DNR's website and this little pop-up here will pop up and you can pick other subscriptions you want to join if you'd like. And then one more newsworthy item, John, you mentioned about the Savannah Lock and Dam. There's been some news about
There has
that in
been.
the past month or two.
So federal government has approved a plan and directed the Army Corps of Engineers to restore and maintain the lock and dam. So this ends a decades-long discussion about the future of the lock and dam. And the bottom line is it preserves the pool to the north of the lock and dam up to the fall line. So think North Augusta on one side, Augusta on the other side of the river. And whatever ideas have been discussed in the past, I assume are no longer active since Congress has directed that this work be done by the Army Corps. So
Okay.
Did they say anything about the fish passage with it?
as far as I know, I haven't read the details of it. One of the alternative ideas was a rock weir in place of the lock and dam. The rock weir would have included definitely a fish passage, but I don't know the details of how it currently operates for fish. If Bill was here, he would know, but he's not. So.
Okay. Yeah, Dean.
Yeah, my understanding is it doesn't currently operate the fish. And so it's always been a battle, and that was when this was one of the requirements that the Corps had to fix as part of the agreements surrounding the expansion of Savannah Harbor. It started about 10 years ago. I mean, South Carolina and Georgia were a lawsuit for 3 or 4 years fighting over that expansion of the harbor, and this is one of the things that kind of spun out of that. It was a core effort to kind of offset some of the negative environmental consequences of the deepening that had to be done there. And so it's been an issue on the table really between South Carolina and Georgia for 10 years at least. And my expectation is that the environmental side wanted those fish passage done, and they wanted everything to go. Fish passage would work. And I think the end result is, no, there ain't gonna be a fish passage. We're just gonna keep things, restore that, keep it like it is, and move on. Because I've been to a couple of meetings on it, because I'm on the Savannah River Maritime Commission on that.
Dean, how much river distance-wise is there from the lock and dam to the fall line?
Probably 1.5 miles.
So that's what we're talking about.
Yep, we're talking about the pond, basically the pond behind the lock and dam.
Yeah.
That is the reservoir that probably adds in terms of the environmental wonderfulness of Augusta and North Augusta. That pond, that impoundment is what had to be restored and saved. Couldn't lose it. If they dropped 1.5 feet or 2 feet based upon a change, it'd be a mess. So this answers a lot of questions, but it does not deal with the fish passage. The interesting thing is, though, that the work that's been done demonstrates that the fish that, of course, the idea was to have them come, the spawning was supposed to theoretically take place up in the areas below the big core dam. Apparently they spawn fine below the dam. There's not a crisis in terms of the fish populations in the lower Savannah as a result of was the expectation. But things seem to be okay. So this was torture. This will get there's more to come because it's a lawsuit just because of my position on the Maritime Commission and somehow locked into the middle of it. Lawyers coming at me for the law 15 steps.
Was there a
There
comment
was a
online?
comment about it. It's my understanding that the Corps would still need to accommodate a fish passage. While Congress passed the act, it is also my understanding that it does not include funding for the repair of the lock.
So it's all still up there.
That's what Tommy
It's gonna
said.
get fixed. Who knows? It's getting, all gonna get worse now because Savannah wants to do another deacon. Savannah Harbor Depot. And that's gonna create another fund.
All right, we have a quorum now. Let's double back.
Yeah.
Whoops, going the wrong way.
Yeah, let's approve our agenda. Has everyone had a chance to review it? Is there a motion to approve? I'll second it. Okay, whatever. Between these two, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Say aye. Any opposed? All right, and then we have minutes from our last meeting, January 19 minutes and meeting summary were distributed. Any
I
major
just
corrections?
needed a clarification on one comment, and that was it. So nothing big, very minor, just fleshed it out.
All right. That being said, I'll entertain a motion to approve this. All right, John, second. Thank you, Reed. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Great.
I think I can turn it back over to you.
Thanks.
Thanks for everyone showing up. We can get stuff done today.
Public and agency comment. Any members of the public online or in the room or agency members like to make comment?
So,
What? That's the first.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Well, it's a very minor comment.
Yeah.
Not minor. So Hannah, who was in my section doing surface water stuff, no longer in my section. And she's now in Scott's section. So she's still clearly gonna be helping out with everything, but now she's helping out the hydrology group with planning. So congratulate Hannah on her new position, still on the division.
Great.
Functionally sitting here, but I'm here for the hydrology group today. So any
All right.
questions for Scott if he's not online? Good time to do.
Yes.
Oh, great. Congratulations. All right, let's talk about the January meeting. Just do a quick review. And Hannah, as a representative of the hydrology group, please chime in if I misstate anything that Scott or Brooke said about demand projections or groundwater.
It's been 4 days. I'll do my best.
Scott talked about demand projections, and I think one of the important things we always want to remember is the difference between a forecast and a projection. DNR has made demand projections. They're not trying to forecast demands. So we look at different scenarios that kind of bookend a potential range of projections. We're extrapolating trends. They're based on these scenarios. They're not necessarily aiming to be accurate, although we want them to be accurate, but they aim to be more informative. So just keep that in mind about our projections. And then he talked about something that's kind of unique for groundwater with regard to the projections. And it wasn't something that was contemplated in the planning framework. And that is this high growth scenario versus a high demand scenario. In the planning framework and the demand methodology, we had typically always had just a high demand scenario, which is kind of this red line. And that was based on the highest monthly demands historically, and then projecting those forward using different factors for different water use sectors. For groundwater, that's a little bit problematic. I think the folks decided that do these projections because it gives you a very high demand, which isn't necessarily appropriate sometimes when you're looking at groundwater. Nevertheless, it is informative because demands at certain times of the year for groundwater could reach that high under our high growth, high demand scenario, but not likely not all year round by any means. So there's a pretty big discrepancy between the high demand and the high growth scenario, 53% through 2070 versus 133% through 2070. This would be a little more meaningful if we were actually plugging these into the groundwater model and looking at each scenario. Since we're not applying the groundwater model as part of this phase, we're looking at this more subjectively. So that's kind of when Brooke took over. We looked at historical water use by sector, and we noticed that public water supply A little bit of an uptick in the later part of the 2010s, but generally not a huge trend. Agriculture seems to be a little bit of an increasing trend, but that could easily be just to better reporting since 2002. And then industrial supply, there does seem to be a slightly decreasing trend, but notice the axis difference on both on these, on industrial supply versus public and water. You know, this is much, industrial supply is much less than those other two sectors. So those were historical trends. Brooke then kind of reviewed where is groundwater used in the basin and what sectors are using it from what aquifers. So I found this very informative. I hope you all did too. I just wanted to do a quick review, kind of going from the bottom of the basin up to the top. You know, down here in the bottom and even up in the middle of the basin, the upper Florida and middle Florida are the primary aquifers. Down in the lower part of the basin, most of this is typically for public supply, not a lot for ag. You know, some for golf courses, but most of the ag is centered up in the middle part of the basin and the upper part of the basin. Crouch and McQueen Branch are the most highly used aquifers up at the top part of the basin. Gordon and Crouch are commonly used in the middle part of the basin. So down on Hilton Head, Brooke talked about the fact that primarily due to Savannah area and Georgia side withdrawals, there had been a steady decline in the upper Florida aquifer until kind of the 90s. In 1998, withdrawals were capped and Hilton Head started supplementing with surface water. And since that time, there's been kind of a leveling in the upper Florida aquifer at least. In Beaufort County, she showed some projections for public supply. You know, the difference between the high growth and the high demand scenario are much more modest because these are public supply projections, not agricultural projections. We don't see those large monthly increases in the summer as much as we do ag. And then kind of moved up basin to Hampton County area. Upper Florida aquifer, these were primarily agricultural water use. And here you do see that big discrepancy in the high demand versus the high growth projections. But we don't really see, at least at this monitoring point on Lake Warren State Park, the upper and middle Florida aquifer, any significant declines other than seasonal declines. So, you know, you see a 6 to 8 foot decline because of pumping during the summer months, but pretty much through the whole period of record here, which is only about 10 years, they recover in the winter and then draw down again in the summer and recover in the winter. I recall we talked about this in the Edisto RBC too, because we were seeing the same thing. And one of the recommendations they had was to better understand if that seasonal drawdown would begin to impact long-term average water levels. So they have a recommendation that focuses on better understanding that and includes adding additional monitoring wells. I think Brooke did make the point that they would like to have more monitoring wells in the middle part of the basin. Okay, and then moving to the top part, Aiken County, this is public water supply demands, mainly again from the Crouch and McQueen Branch. Not a lot else to say here. This was Aiken County public water supply use, and she showed a hydrograph, which doesn't, well, back in the 1990s, McQueen Branch, water levels were a little higher. There's a gap, and then they kind of declined. Now they seem to be starting to go back up with perhaps a slight decline in the last couple of years. A lot of variability there, I guess. She pointed out that City of Aiken conjunctively uses surface water from Shaw's Creek and groundwater. So her overall observations are that under current demands, aquifer levels, for the most part, in both the lower Savannah and Salkehatchie basins are generally stable. Some past declines were associated with demands in the Savannah, Georgia area, and some due to past droughts. Larger water users in the basin are public supply and Beaufort and Aiken, and then their demands are expected to increase. Supply side management should be continued to meet water demands and slow the saltwater intrusion at the coast. We'll talk about that as part of our water management strategies discussion in a minute. And then agriculture irrigation, there's kind of an expectation that will increase in the counties in the middle part of the basin. And they would like to have more monitoring wells to ensure that there's not long-term drawdowns in the Crouch and the Queen Branch and even Upper Florida and Florida in the middle part of the basin. All right, any questions about what Brooke and Scott reviewed? Okay. Let's move into water management strategies. We talked about this last time, but we got to the point where we were ready to kind of select strategies. Bring everybody back up to speed. I'm just going to kind of do a quick review to get us back to that point. Again, water management strategies are those that are proposed to eliminate a surface water shortage, reduce a surface water shortage, or increase surface water. And in our case, since we didn't really identify any specific high frequency shortages through the period of record, we're focusing on strategies that will help increase surface water and prevent potential shortages in the future that we might not have even envisioned due to changing conditions. Groundwater management strategies are those that are meant to address a groundwater area of concern or a shortage. And a groundwater area of concern is one that the RBC decides that is causing an expected or expected to cause an unacceptable impact to the resource. We had a brief discussion about groundwater areas of concern, and I don't think there was any consensus on identifying officially a groundwater area of concern, but I don't want to presume that's still the case. Does anybody want to define a groundwater area of concern? And the only one that I could potentially think of would be down kind of in the Hilton Head area where there's been saltwater intrusion, and there could potentially be if it's not managed appropriately.
Yeah, I don't think you can leave that off. I think you have to say something about saltwater intrusion.
Mm-hmm.
I think it already is
I
an
mean,
area
it's-
of concern,
yeah.
or it has been. We should acknowledge that
Yeah.
it is, and
I think it's a new.
but I kept waiting for her to identify another one, but didn't appear there was any great,
In other parts of the basin.
yeah, in other
Right.
parts, yeah.
Yeah, Dean.
John, the Edisto area is kind of, seems to me right on the boundary between the area we're worrying about and the Edisto River Committee. Right along the coast, right down there on the coast, just north of Port Royal Sound. Because the Salkehatchie runs into Port Royal Sound. And that area has no surface water availability. It's on the ocean, potentially high growth area. And there hasn't been an issue there that I'm aware of. I didn't see anything when I scanned through the Edisto report. Is that something we should be thinking about? Because we have to think about the demand for housing and is going to continue to increase dramatically. And Edisto is the one spot kind of between Charleston and Beaufort where it's been pretty quiet for a long time. And you just kind of keep thinking that, there's a chance that some big developer like Del Webb is going to find that place and wander in there and pop down, 1,000 houses. I just don't know whether that's something we should try to anticipate, whether it was anticipated in the Edisto discussions. And I guess it's just a question.
That area of the Edisto Basin did not come up during their discussion. So they didn't discuss, the groundwater modeling didn't suggest that there might be an issue, but it could have easily just been because of assumptions that were in the groundwater modeling, and they didn't, reflect the potential for a lot of growth and groundwater use in that portion. I don't know if you could say you expect it to have unacceptable impacts based on what you know right now, but you might decide it could be, and I'm making up a term here, an area of interest, one that should be monitored. So you might want to make a recommendation that If growth continues as planned in this area or as envisioned, perhaps additional monitoring should be put here to limit the impact on overuse of groundwater.
Well, in my mind, if we had a model, that could be a what if scenario. What if a large demand was in this area of the aquifer, right? Because I think about that in Hampton County too. There's nothing major going on, but it wouldn't take much to be major here and then potentially cause an impact. So,
Yeah.
Hopefully one of our recommendations is going to be to develop that model, that continue to develop it, maybe do some what if.
Yeah, that's
Scenarios on these areas of interest.
another good recommendation. So keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll talk about that probably in about an hour or so.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, should we have growth as just a general area of concern as related to groundwater withdrawals? Beaufort, mainland Beaufort County, Jasper County, Hampton. The growth is already explosive in mainland Beaufort, southern Beaufort County. Jasper County, and Hampton certainly is ripe for such, it's a lot of raw land that a Delaware or whomever could, and the potential's there that it's not going to be all surface water from Beaufort Jasper, whatever the Beaufort Jasper is going to have to go and get groundwater, new groundwater sources to serve its service area and things like that. Not to plunge us backward.
Sure.
But should we caveat, or if I'm just misunderstanding, but when they make the statement that the public use, the largest users in the basin is public supply in Beaufort and Aiken counties, should that be caveated in terms of they're the largest that is permitted and monitored? Because the ag isn't subject, the ag use for groundwater isn't quantified in the same way and permitted in the same way that the public use is. Or am I misunderstanding?
The groundwater and surface water are permitted very differently, so all groundwater ag users have permits.
The permits.
Yes, surface water is totally different.
But are they reporting their withdrawals?
Yes.
And they're reporting the withdrawals?
Yeah,
Okay.
so they have the same requirements as any other groundwater withdrawal permit. Yep.
Because they're capacity use areas.
Because of capacity use area.
Yeah.
Taylor Brewer had a comment. I don't know if she wants to unmute. If not, I can read it.
Sure. Taylor, if you want to verbalize your comment, or Tom can read it, whatever you prefer.
I think Brooke answered it. I was just asking if there was any connection between septic tank inundation and groundwater. But Brooke said there wasn't any discussion about it. So I appreciate her answer.
Okay. Pete, do you have one more thing?
Just one other area of concern. I don't know if we should somehow note the potential, because I think they've discussed it over there, but the potential for some kind of subsidence impact in at least upper Florida due to these withdrawals in I always get confused if it's Bryan County or Bullitt County, but where the Hyundai plant is being built, Bryan in Georgia. Which maybe ties it. I think we had a note about the need for reconstituting some kind of interstate discussions, but I think that's been said over on their side of the river that they do think that they will somehow cause some subsidence of the upper in Beaufort County area because of the withdrawals there.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. Let's bring that back up too. We're talking about recommendations. That could be a recommendation that be
Maybe we could
monitored.
put our agenda, we seem eager.
Yeah,
It's too much time.
Yeah.
I think that part of going back to Edisto, I think part now having been a resident for 6.5 years there and for the 5 years previous up in Multiboro, depends on your definition of strong development. And yes, while there are no Dale Webbs, that sort of thing, there is a lot happening down there that is not on the radar because it's smaller entities doing it. And whether and a big concern of some of the residents is the relaxing of zoning and permitting requirements, starting with the town of Edisto Beach and then having moved west and north throughout the county. And I just think some way or another I'll be mentioned because a lot's really happening. It doesn't make the papers because it's 100 acre share, 10 lot share, that sort of thing by entities that are not highly visible, such as public companies.
But then all you gotta do is look up Highway 17 and Charleston is exploding southward. You look all along 17, Ravenel, Hollywood, all that is planned. And which there has been a lot of turmoil around it. I mean, the town of Hollywood had to have several meetings and changes that they had people in the parking lot because they couldn't get them in the building over all that's going on. So again, yes, there's not the big 1,000 home thing of others, but there's a lot of 10 and 20 and 30 going up everywhere in places that have never been able to be buildable before. In other words, in some of those situations, doesn't matter what kind of septic system they put in, lenders would not lend on them. I know we wouldn't have, and didn't. And now because of changes, whether it's county, local, whatever, stuff's happening. And if you talk to the people that provide water to those people, basically the well drillers, they're telling us now that they're having to drill much deeper than they've ever had before to get to water. And these are people that's been down there 30, 40 years. So, and that's the only anecdote or only evidence that I've got is that the people there, wow, how is that? Well, nobody's ever built on there in 50 years because they couldn't. But now they get a permit. Well, what kind of water elsewhere in established areas where people have chosen now to dig a well for whatever reason. They're going much deeper, and I'm not talking 50 to 100 feet. I'm talking 250, 300 feet deeper than they've ever had to go forward to get good quality water. So anyway, that's a lot of rambling that doesn't belong in this, but in some way or another, I think we ought to mention, put it on watch what's happening on the other stove or however term you want to use. And because that you're right, the island itself hadn't been much there, but it's coming from both ways. And we see it all the time.
Okay. Good. All right. This is going back 2 or 3 meetings ago. We did some brainstorming to start talking about water management strategies. We identified a whole suite of supply side strategies. We also talked about demand side strategies. I'm not going to run through them again. Hopefully you remember these and we'll talk about them in a second. We had a discussion about the effectiveness of existing strategies. We learned firsthand from our field trip and from others about Hilton Head's Reclaimed Water and how that's effective, their program. We talked about regionalization and how that's been effective in terms of technical and financial capacity for some small providers. There's some discussion about more incentives needed for water conservation. We had a discussion about can these existing strategies be expanded? And I think we felt that, yeah, there was opportunity for expansion of things like reclaimed water, where there's new construction, new golf courses, even potentially new industry. We talked about the importance of prioritizing some of these strategies. State funding was discussed as being important, and groundwater barrier wall potentially, which you've been thinking about in terms of discharging highly treated wastewater, which would require regulatory framework to allow that. So we'll talk about that too in a little bit. What strategies are relevant in the basins and should be further evaluated. We had a whole suite here. Let's continue to start talking about those. As we select strategies, keep these things in mind. We don't want to be too prescriptive for certain users because everybody has different financial and technical resources. Not every strategy is applicable to every water user. We talked about uncertainty. We want to keep that in the back of our mind when we discuss these strategies and which strategies might help us mitigate the impacts of uncertainty as we move forward. And that plays into an adaptive management plan. We did a little exercise to talk about what are some of the uncertainties in this basin. And we've just talked about for the last 10 minutes, one of them, which is growth. We really don't know how the basins will grow, but we've seen growth in certain areas that may be cause of concern and might help us develop certain strategies or develop recommendations to help monitor that growth. So keep those uncertainties in mind. All right, that brings us to strategy discussion. This is where we want get all of your feedback and basically get the information we need to write chapter 7 of our plan, which identifies the strategies that you think are important and useful going forward. We're going to first talk about supply side strategies. In most of the RBCs, we've focused on demand side strategies because there hasn't been significant shortages or gaps that we need to fill with a supply side strategy. There's only been a few examples in the broad. There was some specific shortages for the town of Gaffney, Cherokee Board of Public Works, and they needed some supply side strategies. That said, I think supply side strategies are important in your basin, and I think we'd encourage you to highlight them and the ones that continue to work well and you want to promote going into the future, like water reuse and use of reclaimed water. We know that's effective down in Hilton Head and potentially in other places. We know that on-site retention of stormwater is important for ag. Brad O'Neill talked about how he collects water and reuses it basically through his impoundments and series of ditches and pumps. So that's effective. We know that conjunctive use is effective for like the city of Aiken. They pull from Shaw's Creek and from groundwater. They need both of those sources, and they're not the only example in the two basins. Interconnections, regionalization, interbasin transfers are important. And then aquifer storage and recovery has been useful, at least in Hilton Head's example. So those are all supply side strategies that are already in use. Question I pose to you, do you think it's necessary to prioritize any of these strategies? Do you think there's some that are more important than others? It should be more emphasized in our plan.
I had a question on the ASR.
Yeah.
How applicable is it potentially across the entire river basin, or is it really site specific and very limited?
I think it's fair to say, I mean, Leanne, I think it's very dependent on the aquifer condition. What kind of aquifer do you have? Otherwise, you won't retain it. You'll watch it, you'll fill it, watch it go away. Too much lift, there's too much lateral.
So would you elevate it in this hierarchy? Given that it's somewhat site specific, I mean, that's my term. I mean, that's part of what you want us to do is prioritize a bit.
If possible,
weight
yeah.
them.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to go to the extent of weighting them, but if some are more of a priority than others, then the planning framework suggests that RBCs prioritize strategies. So that's why I'm asking the question. Another, I guess, point of information to help address your question, in the Edisto, Orangeburg does ASR, and I think Eric Odom would tell you that it's been mixed results. It hasn't worked as well as they would have hoped. I believe they still do it, but I think they have trouble withdrawing what they've put in sometimes. And I'm not sure all the issues, there may be water quality related, but it hasn't been as effective as they originally hoped. But again, that's just due to the different conditions.
Beaufort Jasper put ASR in, started 30 years ago. And there are 3 off Hilton Head, 3 ASR systems, one on Port Royal Island, one at the water plant, and one in Southern Beaufort County near Bluffton. And all of them are very significantly valuable to summer demand, because we want it in during the winter, we hold it during the winter where you have treatment capacity excess, and then in the summer, we pull it out and use it to make up the difference. So it's a critical.
Grand Strand does that.
Yeah, I think Grand Strand as well does that. I think those are probably 4 applications across. No, does Mount Pleasant do it too? Do that? So 5 maybe. Grand Strand, Mount Pleasant, Orangeburg, you all. Beaufort, Jasper.
There's several on the island.
And
So
others.
except for Orangeburg, it sounds like it's mostly coastal
Right.
areas that are doing it more than anywhere else.
I think it's probably important to understand if we have something about the understanding of the potentiality for it in different places. So some kind of studying or some kind of, you don't know it until you try it.
Know the potential.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Beaufort Jasper is, not far from Hilton Head. I believe their ASRs are in a a shallower layer of the aquifer than what we use. They had success there.
What about saltwater treatment and taking ocean water, treating it, converting it to potable use? I mean, we have an incredible water supply. All we need to do is figure out how to get the fresh water out. In the long term, you know, it's expensive, but it's there.
Right.
Technologies are available. Is that a strategy that ought to be at least noted?
Yeah, it's up to you all, but it's,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Membrane treatment, brackish groundwater and desal.
Mhm.
Ours that y'all came and saw is brackish groundwater.
Right.
If this is a long-term plan, we have to have it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just one of those uncertainties. Growth could significantly explode. You could have a long-term drought, which reduces the amount of recharge, even though the water you're pulling from the coast has probably been there for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. But still, there could be a point where some communities may need to consider it, or it'd be cheaper than piping in fresh water from some source way up basin. Yeah, we can note that as a strategy that may need further discussion later on. Yeah. Okay. Back to the prioritization. Do you, and all RBCs have not felt the need to necessarily prioritize their strategies. Some of them said, you know, it's all dependent on the user, the conditions, the location, geography. So oftentimes they haven't. In fact, more often than not, they haven't really tried to prioritize strategies. In the case of Cherokee County, Gaffney, they did prioritize them because there was some easily prioritized criteria, like the cost of getting water from Spartanburg versus putting in a new intake in the Broad River versus building a reservoir versus increasing the dam height of their existing reservoir. So they prioritize those based on cost criteria and other technical criteria. In this case, we don't really have a problem we're trying to solve at the moment. So I would encourage you not to necessarily try to prioritize the list that we're looking at here, but recognize that any one of these may be useful going forward. That makes sense? Okay. What about that last question? What strategy would be most useful to adapt to changing conditions? Are there any on the list that you think would be the first go-to strategies potentially if say we had a multi-year long-term drought or we had a lot more growth than anticipated?
I think the interconnections and regionalization of public water supply systems is really the most important.
Think so?
The water reuse.
I think, yeah, it's either water use or retention. Conductive use. I'm not sure about interconnections just because there's a lot more. There's a lot more you gotta do with that in terms of piping and if it's not already there. A lot more construction, which for now we don't have to do because those connections are not necessarily.
Well, if you're gonna distribute water reuse, there's a lot of piping involved in that too.
It's true.
You know, interconnections, they can be there and be available. They don't have to be used, you know, unless there is a need for them, you know, between two cities or systems.
Yeah.
The water reuse, if you look at it from the standpoint of not as that list using it for effluent irrigation, but if you're able to recharge an ASR with your water reuse, you're really only talking about a pipeline from your effluent source to your ASR, which hopefully could be used to supply your water treatment and, you know, utilize the existing distribution network. Versus, I think what that's getting to is a separate system for irrigation of whatever golf courses, homes. But utilizing it as a true drinking water source. And then storing it in an aquifer, it'd be available for those periods of drought. Without the line piping.
Well, I think that's where membrane treatment then rises up too, because that's what you'd be doing, you know, you'd want membrane treatment on the reclaimed. To turn it into indirect recharge
Yeah.
or turn it into potable.
Mhm. Okay.
What about something like, I mean, in this regard, should something like permitting be mentioned? I mean, that if it's a changing condition, yet we're living under restrictions. Should there be some kind of note of, well, those restrictions might have to change? We have to change our thinking about capacity use zone if treatment techniques are available to allow for more pumping of something.
Mhm.
Or gets to that point.
Yeah, that probably does merit discussion, probably as a recommendation. So keep that one on the parking lot, I guess, or in mind, and we'll get to that in a minute. It feeds off of a strategy, but that'll be a recommendation, I think. Okay, that's all useful. We'll try to capture that discussion as we write up these supply side strategies. But before I move on to demand side, is there any more strategy or discussion needed on supply side strategies?
There was a hand raised.
Yeah, Tanya, did you have a comment or a question?
I wanted to support I think it was Dean that said the connectivity and regionalization, because I think it also allows for agreements on the permitting and the supply side if everybody is sharing. And I think there's probably pretty different regulations in the different communities right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Do you want us to include a discussion of interconnections that are purely for emergency purposes and to build resilience, so you have multiple source options? I think we've been talking about interconnections here just as a source of supply, but I don't know how many existing interconnections there are in these basins, especially amongst the small users. I'm assuming not many, if any, right? Just because they're geographically pretty spread out. And to do an interconnection, even just for emergency purposes, it's not financially possible. That a fair statement?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
We have interconnections between two small towns and another interconnection being constructed. And others planned.
For emergency purposes primarily, or just to normally move water around?
Both,
Both. Okay.
just to improve supply availability and redundancy. Resiliency.
Yeah, keep pressures. Okay, okay. Okay, I'm going to move on to demand side strategies. If everybody said their piece here. Okay, we have any ag representatives on the call? No, we've got golf courses here, Brad. I think I'm going to have to reach out separately to our ag folks. Joey Oswalt and I did have a discussion last week or last month around the list that you see here, and I think he generally felt all of these were useful, depending on the situation. And I think especially he said, yeah, he thinks water audits, nozzle retrofits for center pivot systems are very useful and encouraged everybody to do that. It's low cost generally to do the audit. It's low cost to modify your nozzles or retrofit them. You get a lot of bang for the buck. I think he prioritized that one pretty high, but I will have to send out this list to Brad, Joey, Sam, the other ag folks, and see if they really want to prioritize them. And make sure they're comfortable with the whole list that we see here. I think we talked about wetting agents. You said those are common in the golf course industry. Any comment on that? Should we keep it on the list of, yeah, this is a good strategy to use because it helps limit how much water you have to apply, right?
Definitely important.
Yep. Any other strategies that golf courses on the demand side can employ to keep their demands down, like turf management or the type of grass that you grow, or
certain grasses use less than others, but same. I mean, when you start converting them I mean, it can get, it's not necessarily,
Yeah.
it can be expensive, so.
Do new golf courses generally put in turf grasses that need less water, or if they have adequate access to water, do they not really use that as decision criteria and they put in whatever looks best, or?
Yeah, I'd say whatever. So definitely picking a variety that doesn't use as much. Some people factor into, but not really. I mean, it's whatever their membership or owners or
Yeah,
whatever.
okay.
And even that, right, I mean, it might save a little bit, but I don't know if it's how much.
Yeah, okay.
Variety will save you.
Okay, does anyone else have comments on the ag conservation demand side strategies? Again, I'll reach out to our ag contingent.
I just
Dean?
have a question. I know on St. Helena Island, the tomato farmers, and we have a large tomato farming operation, 2 or 3 major growers on St. Helena Island. And they have converted everything to drip. So basically, when they lay in the tomato plants, they come in there and they lay a drip line down, and every plant has its own drip system. So they're not, they used to spray, they used to just pump and spray irrigation. And I know that technique really depends on what you're growing. I mean, you can't drip bang. But is that a strategy that's worth discussion? I mean, it might, or at least mention, depending upon the crop, because you can, if you can go to drip, you can reduce the amount of water you're using per acre by 60-70%.
Yeah, yep.
And evaporation doesn't become an issue.
Right.
And that's a huge problem that we have here because it gets so hot. You spray it out there, half of it evaporates before you can. And leaves the solid form, leaves the salts and the stuff that's in there in the soil. So I don't know whether, because the farmers have to make that call, and it's not something that we could do, but.
Would that not fall under irrigation equipment changes?
It does, yeah.
If that's under there, that's fine.
Yeah, I think in the discussion we have in chapter 6, it falls under there. Is it precision irrigation or is it high efficiency irrigation when you're doing drip? Do you remember what category it falls under? I want to say it's precision.
Drip was precision,
right?
Because it's like Dean said,
yeah,
little to no evaporation. It's very precise. It gets right to the root.
Yeah. But I believe we have that described in chapter 6, but we'll double check to make sure. In the Broad Basin, we toured Cooley Farms where they have the same drip type system for all their strawberries. And they've just got this huge network of strawberry fields and whatever. If it gets overwatered at all, it drains down to these ponds where then they pump it back up to the top and they keep reusing it, kind of like Brad does. So got a very complicated system that limits the amount of water they need and reuses the water that they need. So it was a good example.
Taylor had a comment here. Beaufort County offers stormwater utility fee credits for golf courses that reuse water for irrigation.
Oh, well, that's great.
Say that again?
Beaufort County offers stormwater utility fee credits for golf courses that reuse water for irrigation.
So keep that in mind. That might be a recommendation you want to make for other municipalities or counties, offer incentives for strategies like that.
You have government incentives for, increased efficiency.
Right. Yep. Okay. I'll reach out to our ag contingent on the RBC separately and see if they are interested in prioritizing these strategies and double check that they're comfortable if we list all of these strategies in chapter 7 of our plan. All right, let's talk about demand side strategies for municipal use. We've generally started in each River Basin Council with this list. It's by no means exhaustive. It's just a kind of typical list of different conservation type strategies that are not necessarily always used in South Carolina, but even other parts of the country. And the RBCs have done an exercise where they go through and they sometimes cross off some of these and say, you know what, this is not really appropriate or useful in our basin. For example, toilet rebate programs. A lot of times they've crossed those off the list because they recognize that, yeah, maybe that was useful 20 years ago, but now all new construction has high efficiency toilets and appliances, we don't really need to do rebates to encourage that. That's just one example. So let's go through this list and talk about each one of these a little bit. And once we go through and decide which ones we want to promote in the plan and list in the plan specifically, then we'll decide, are there any prioritization that we want to do to any of these? Do we want to highlight any of them any more than the others? I also want to know if there's some not listed here, which there may very well be, that you think should be included. And do remember, we talked about drought surcharges already. I think y'all made the recommendation, like most RBCs did, that water utilities should consider incorporating a surcharge on their rates during drought conditions, like severe or extreme conditions, as a disincentive for people to use more water. So we've already covered that one. Now we're just talking about general conservation strategies that certainly help during drought, but aren't specifically focused on drought. So the first one, conservation pricing structures, drought surcharges. We've already discussed that. That's in chapter 8. In addition to a drought surcharge, obviously you could have a recommendation, or you could promote a strategy focused on inclining block rate structures. Do you want to make that as a strategy?
That should be a top thing.
Think so?
And that is a best practice for public water suppliers.
Okay.
You have to have inclining block rate.
Yeah. So what do other water suppliers think? Because I don't think that's typical in a lot of water utilities throughout the state, but
That is a conservation pricing structure. We can say conservation pricing structure.
inclining block rate. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it, or it's typically recommended that those be applied uniformly across all users, or is it typically assigned to like residential only? Are commercial or industries left out of that?
Not in our case, and I think, we're not making this up. That's an American Water Works Association best practice. So I think, no, they consider, commercial as well.
I just think that's an important
Yeah.
thing, that it doesn't end up creating an unfair type of rate structure, towards one type of user. But I think each system is unique too, so, there's not a one size fits all, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of discussion in the other RBCs about, does that impact the financials of the system? If you start charging more for higher rates, does that encourage people to do what you want, lower their water usage, but can the utility withstand that financial impact? It's, I mean, yeah. Well, so Pete's a proponent of it. I'm looking to you two because you operate smaller systems.
I mean, it's a pretty AWWA,
That's practice, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
that's
It's
practice.
not exactly how you can manage it.
How do you guys charge them?
I was just across the board,
Flat.
flat rate.
You pay a flat monthly rate or quarterly
I
rate?
mean, it's
volume-
based, we have a base price. Depending on what the size of the pipe is, and then, but the amount per gallon is the same for every user.
Yeah, we have a constant volumetric.
Yeah.
I mean, ours is combined. You pay a base charge and then you pay volumetric,
Yeah, and your volumetric is declining.
inclining block.
Inclining block.
I think throughout the state, that flat rate is a lot more common than inclining block.
Maybe with the size of the utility.
And it's very directly related to the size of utility, I think. But Beaufort Jasper, does it have increasing block, or you're flat too?
We're looking into it. I
Mhm.
mean, I think it's like Pete said, it's a good practice. I know in our area, I don't know if it will affect what people do in their homes. It seems like we just have a lot of users that don't care.
Yeah.
Probably a good thing because the revenue, but I don't think it'll change their behavior.
Do you think it changes the behavior of your customers? Have you always had it in place, or since you've been there, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it's hard to say, I'm sure. Yeah, okay.
No, I mean, they still irrigate like crazy.
Okay.
They pay attention.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there's general support for it. There's some concerns about potential rates, but.
Yeah,
you
I
would
guess
not-
in general, I think it should be supported as far as priority. I think that's where, I guess.
That's
I
where you
might
might
differ.
differ, right? Okay. We'll come back to the prioritization part then. What about public education and water conservation? Yeah. Okay. The Upper Savannah, prioritize that as the first priority for all of these. And other RBCs have prioritized it high. Why wouldn't you do that? You know, low cost. Hopefully you'd have an effective program, but seems like the baseline, you should start with that. So everybody agree? Yep.
We don't,
Again,
we make a
it's-
distinction between the words efficiency and conservation. I mean, wherein like conservation means something is happening and we need you to really stop. As opposed to efficiency being, we know you're going to be using it. Please think about using it in the most efficient way you can.
Right.
Conservation having more like a
We
a
got,
pipe's broken, there's a drought, there's a, we have a treatment problem, It's more of an emergency type of word,
Okay.
if that matters.
No, I think it does. Yeah. Okay. Landscape irrigation programs, codes, time of day, watering limits. I'm gonna look again, Pete, do you have all that in place?
I mean, it's the most broken local ordinance in US history. It's a local ordinance there about when you can irrigate, but there's no enforcement of it.
No enforcement.
It's used as a
It's only
PR.
during drought that we have a problem, that we go into any kind of mode and plan, cutting back or certain types of things, but it's only during drought. We don't have an issue.
Yeah.
Because we have a number of, some people have their landscaping irrigation systems on well water. Because they can actually do that in the city, doing that, so we have no control over that.
It's hard to enforce it when you don't know who's doing what sometimes.
Yeah.
Some education around it because these new developments, what happens is they set those timers for the sod growth. So they don't want it dying. And once it's established, no one ever goes back in there and changes it down. And so customers they're over irrigating. They have no clue they're doing it. I mean, a lot of these things are under a contract. And so there's a lot you can do in that area to get folks established sod and grass to irrigate the proper amount. And the time of day and all that really does help the water supply for a, potable water system.
Yeah.
It does have a huge factor.
Well, that almost gets back to just public education.
It is, yeah, it's definitely part of your
Yeah.
public education piece.
Yeah. Well, do you think landscape irrigation programs and codes and enforcing time of day watering limits, or having them and enforcing them, is a strategy you want to recommend?
I don't know, we did. Smaller systems wouldn't be able to do something like that, so.
Yeah.
I think it's a tool, but I wouldn't want to say it's for everyone.
Yeah.
You can have it too. I mean, restricting it by a day of the week or time of day. You can have people with busted irrigation systems and the amount of water that you can waste, even though I'm only irrigating 2 days a week, well, you can waste a ton of water just irrigating the 2 days a week, So the effectiveness of it is tough. And like I said, like in our case, it's been around a long time. It was done by the island when capacity use was implemented. It was one of the things it had to like show the state that it was doing. But it's really just used as public information tool. It's not, nobody runs around.
Right, enforcement, I would.
But you actually, I mean, it is a full blown ordinance, like they find, but
Right.
never ever happened.
Okay. I mean, where I live in the Triangle of North Carolina, and some of the past droughts, 2008, 2002, there was a lot of push around finding people for, you were calling on your neighbor, and city of Raleigh, city of Durham were enforcing it because they needed to.
But Virginia Beach went through the same process 15, 20 years ago.
I'm sure if we had someone here, if Ken was here from California or Denver,
yeah.
where,
Nationally,
they'll turn you in and then.
Yes, Texas, California, absolutely.
Washing your car on the wrong day.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So.
Beaver Jasper has a program water in particular days of the week, depending upon, particularly in the summer, because this last summer, they've been in a stressful situation with respect to treatment capacity. Treatment capacity by next summer, theoretically, will be back up to where we want it. But as a customer, everything is monitored now electronically. So if they tell me I'm not supposed to water on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm only going to water on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If I water on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I hear about it. Because the meter feeds back data to their computer, which never looks at it. It's an automatic, send him a message, you were watering on this day. But I mean, it makes me as a customer think about it more than I would conceivably think about it otherwise. I guess that's what I say.
So you're notified, is there any other kind of enforcement?
Nobody comes knocking on my door and says,
But with AMI, I mean, it's easy to set up.
Sure.
You plug in what their schedule is supposed to be. It's very easy to see on an hourly usage.
Oh, yeah.
Gaining.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like Dean said, it's automated. So once it's set up, it's relatively not a large workload for staff.
But that's few and far between, and a lot of, these smaller systems don't have that.
yeah,
It may be, and I think a lot of these kind of build on each
We
other,
don't have that.
yeah. And I do think, John, that we need to be very conscious of this, of the things that would apply to larger systems and things that don't make any sense for smaller systems. There are certain strategies that smaller systems can use and will use effectively. They're much more personal, much smaller, much more relationship than large systems are.
Right.
And so, to me, as we look at this, we need to be conscious of that and kind of say, maybe the expectations for larger systems should be a little different than smaller systems. I'm just trying to, I'm not quite sure. One size does not fit all in this.
Yeah, I think of all the basins, there's the biggest contrast, I think, in this basin of different types of systems. Hilton Head's very unique for many reasons, including socioeconomically and how they use water and where it's coming from compared to some of the other systems in the basin with completely different customers and different types of use and where you get your water from. That observation is right on. Okay, well, it sounds like there's some support for these landscape program codes, but it's not something that is strongly enforced. It's not something that you're really pushing forward and encouraging it. So we'll take that in consideration when we list it in there, but it probably doesn't sound like it's going to be a prioritized strategy. You don't want to cross it off the list, though. I mean, some of you have it in place, it's just not enforced. So, yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah, I think Brian pointed out these next two kind of work together. Leak detection, water loss control programs, and kind of part and parcel of that are advanced metering infrastructure and automated metering automated meter reading. There's a difference between the two. And Brian, can you explain the difference between AMI and AMR? You can't? No, you're going to make me do it because I can't do it very well. Do you know the difference?
I mean, in our context, AMI is the two-way communication, tower read metering, smart point on the meter.
Yeah.
Fixed network.
Yeah, fixed network.
Yeah. So
they use RF, but you can use cellular too.
Okay.
Whereas automated meter reading is anything that eliminates a person having to get out of their truck and manually read the meter. So it could be a wand, it could be a drive-by, or AMI is automated as well. So, but I think the advanced metering is where you have that. You're not just getting data once a month.
To it.
Right.
And AMI allows you to get, like, you could show a customer
Constant feedback, right?
Yeah,
Hey, an hour ago.
You're watering.
Yeah, an hour ago, you started, using 300 gallons.
We only pour it today.
Okay, well, 4 hours here.
We have to wait about 6 hours.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Ours will do like 15-minute intervals.
And those two things, leak detection, the water loss control and all this, that is something that even smaller systems like ours are moving towards.
Yes.
That is something we are working towards. Because we can't afford not to.
Right.
So that is something that we're all trying to do. And so I think that is important, because we can't afford not to go out for protection and work. So I think that's something that is important.
Okay. Would you all agree?
Yeah, that's better.
Do you? Certainly leak detection, the water loss control programs, AMI and the AMR. It does seem like more utilities are moving towards that, if not AMR, then sometimes even AMI.
Even smaller systems are, if it's grant money, if it's whatever, we're slowly getting to that point. I mean, we have about 2,000 meters in our system, and we're not quite halfway there in putting everything in automated. So, but we're constantly working towards, every time we pull a meter, we're putting a new automated one in. Everything that we replace now is automated. So, and we're gonna, with a new capital project sales tax, we're gonna be adding more to those. So it's just a constant work on to do that.
Okay.
So and we're actually going to the advanced metering infrastructure as well, and where we can start pulling everything off of the guys and walking around with their phones and doing stuff. So
great.
It's getting there.
Okay. So it seems like y'all would prioritize both AMI, AMR, and leak detection almost as high as public education. Is that a fair statement? Right up at the top, right?
I mean, for systems like ours where there's so much aging infrastructure, you can't afford not to. You have to continue to work towards figuring out where all those leaks are in the systems that are issues. So you got to take care of that.
Okay.
Well, which, the metering, you have up in parentheses there, replacement of aging infrastructure. Between our distribution and the meter, there's a whole lot of leaks going on that AMI isn't gonna catch,
Sure.
I mean. A lot of these systems were built and they're approaching 100, 30s and 40s, they're not long before they're 100 years old. And I don't think when any of those people were designing them, they were counting on them being lasting that long. And they're not, they're leaking, so.
Maybe you could add district metering in there too.
What did you call it? District
metering? So just basically measuring the flow at strategic points in your system. And then it just comes like a mass balance of here's what we put in, here's what happened with meters, and here's what went through these specific spots, and it helps you narrow down specific areas of water loss, not just system wide what your water loss is.
Or other water loss detection.
And if you use the AMI technology on those metering spots, central metering spots, you look at it, what's happening between midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning. How much water is moving through that meter? And that's going to tell you something pretty strong.
Then you gotta find them.
Yeah, find them. Still gotta find them.
Still gotta find that.
Yeah.
Of course, when we have cold weather like we have had.
Green grass is.
Yeah, when we have cold weather like we have had, we can usually find them really quick after it starts warming back up. Because that's when they tend to break.
The term, John, is this non-revenue water program. Like that the public utility have a non-revenue water program. So it entails, this is what we think is actually from leaks. This is metered but unbilled. The fire department doesn't pay for what, that kind of thing. And but so the utility has a concept of what is, it's never going to recover in revenue, but it's going out nonetheless.
Right.
I'll say water.
NRW.
Yeah.
What you use for like flushing or something, for example.
Yes, the utility's own use. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what about some of these other ones? Car wash recycling ordinances. Some water stressed communities have those. I haven't heard much desire to have those in any of the basins we've been through.
We'd like more car washes. We only have one.
I mean, most car washes we see, they submit plans that were already in it. So I've never looked and see if it's an ordinance or if it's just their business model they've figured out.
It's cheaper just to have their own recycling system rather than to keep paying for fresh
There's a
water.
significant incentive.
Yeah.
economic incentive to recycle.
Yeah.
But to your point, Aiken has got new ones. They're growing like
Oh,
tops.
yeah, they are. I can jump
And they're not inexpensive to use. So there's a business model that supports more of these than fewer.
So what I'm hearing is it's just coming in naturally. You don't need an ordinance to require it, and there's no need for an ordinance. Okay. What about a water waste ordinance? And this could be a number of things, I guess. It could be like, enforcing irrigating hardscapes, if your irrigation system's not been modified or not been well maintained and you're watering a parking lot. I think that could fall under water waste ordinance. I'm not sure what else might fall under there. I haven't read the description in a while, but I think any ordinances are necessary to enforce effective use of water, limit waste.
I think those ordinances come into play in response to situations. If we had went into a 3 or 4 year drought like we had in the early 90s, those ordinances would start to pop up. People would have it. But it's a general statement. We have a sufficient, in terms of resource around here, we've got a sufficient amount of water that politically nobody particularly wants to take that shot, and as it involves enforcement, involves,
right,
probably upsetting people and blah blah blah.
Right.
But if we go into a significant drought again, I will predict that stuff will start to happen.
Okay. In addition to what utilities might already have in their drought plan for the severe and extreme phase, you're saying they may ask for 20% reductions and require certain things during their severe phase, but then they might also consider implementing a water waste ordinance. That kind of what you're explaining?
Yeah, I mean, and for the most part, these are municipalities. So the implementation of the ordinance, or the enaction of that ordinance and its implementation, is a political act.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this. So it's the utilities like Beaufort Jasper, or the home utilities that don't have elected meters. They're a little more immune from a lot of the pushback that would come when elected officials with stuff like that.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to speak up a little bit so the online folks can hear. Hopefully they caught that, but. Okay. We can mention it, but just say it may only need to be considered under extreme circumstances. Is that a fair approach? Doesn't sound like there's a lot of desire to keep it as a recommended strategy. Okay. What about the toilet rebate program? Does everybody understand what that is? Yeah, seeing thumbs down, not needed.
Yeah,
not effective.
It's kind of a thing of the past.
Right. Yeah.
Indoor water use has dramatically declined the past 25 years from water efficient fixtures.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask retailers, I bet you that it's nearly 100%. That's what they're selling. So,
right.
The same with the height, the ADA. Try and buy an old normal toilet is almost impossible. Yeah, the market's changed.
I did read some national news that there could be a movement, I guess, away from some of that. I don't know how rapidly that could occur, but there is some discussion at the federal level.
I'm gonna bite my tongue and
It might affect those kind of.
We need to go back to our list of unknown.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
Yeah. Residential water audits. I think that would be useful. I mean, I think the ag folks say, yeah, ag irrigation audits are useful. I don't know about residential water audits.
So tell me what you mean by this. Is like in my individual house, asking homeowners to do a residential audit?
Right. So you might have someone on utility that's part of your education outreach program that would come to a home and give them an audit. Basically identify areas where there could be leaks or waste of water, or give them tips on, if you switched out your 25-year-old washing machine, things like that. Shower heads,
Lawn irrigation.
lawn irrigation is probably the biggest
My
one.
biggest concern or my biggest question is who's gonna do that?
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah, get in a small system,
I mean, I don't know if it's gonna come from a small system or if it's gonna come from some nonprofit that is out there trying to,
or like
usually that's where it's coming from.
Rural Water
Nonprofit trying to-
Association,
Yeah,
maybe.
water
Yeah.
association is trying
Yeah.
to combat against us or something, I don't know, but
Yeah.
a power company, they come around.
Yeah,
I mean, we do that utilities like ourselves, we do that informally with the customers all the time. That's
Oh,
what a
yeah.
technician at your house is doing half the, you have an
Yeah.
old water
When you're doing
softener.
hot rain,
when your bills, you come in there,
Yeah.
the guys, they'll do it, but it's not like,
Happens all the time
it's doing it while there's a problem, they're not gonna come and just
as a program.
as
Give
a
you
program.
The utilities I've seen it do, like San Antonio Water is huge on that. And it takes the staffing and then like the expertise, like they are employing like a horticulturalist. That then they come out and, okay, they should not have this and let's move that to that. And they'll give them whole plans and.
right.
I think it'd be a wonderful thing for all of us to have, but the financial and staffing commitment to something like that is.
So
it's tough.
California does that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Zero escaping.
Yeah.
certainly much more common in water stressed areas and rather uncommon in areas like South Carolina. Okay. I'm going to cross that one off the list. I don't think hearing much reason to recommend that one. What about building code requirements? So requiring certain water efficiency standards for new construction. And Brian, are you saying that that's part of?
I'm not familiar with different Jasper building codes. I would imagine if they're using standard IBC, that's all just built in by now.
I think it's built in.
Built in, yeah.
Cause I think all the updated IBCs has got all
I mean, like was mentioned, you can't hardly buy a toilet that's not already water
Yeah.
efficient. Already.
Right.
And I think in Beaver Jasper, they charge a capacity fee. So if you're a developer, you're building a house, you're going to get charged kind of for what that house might use, so much a gallon, average day. And so there's always an incentive on the part of the developer to come in and say, I'm gonna put in this, this, and this, and reduce the demand. And the utility, I don't know if Beaver Jasper still does it, but we used to basically work with the developers to choose and design the system to be water efficient. And they get a credit. So they wouldn't have to pay as much for the capacity that they were locking up. But it really becomes, it's a complicated business practice, and it's like, it is like the reclaimed water audits. It's a similar kind of business practice that takes a certain amount of time. I mean, I think there should be city ordinances that I guess would be what I'd say is in the case of cities, there should be ordinances that generally require certain considerations in terms of the stuff you install and how you design it. Yeah, most places don't have it.
Okay. Okay, well, I've removed it just based on the discussion that the building code already requires that for the most part. Are there any other conservation or efficiency strategies for municipal water use that you all want to highlight or recommend?
I mean, I had a totally nuclear thought about just moratoriums on the installation of new irrigation systems for residential turf and ornamental landscape. I mean, that is what is killing us.
So say that again, moratoriums on that.
Putting in new irrigation systems, new construction, and the system is just for residential turf and ornamental.
So basically telling people,
You can't have a new one anymore. If you have one, I mean, you're not gonna go around and rip up the ones that are there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have the biggest immediate impact for so many of our communities. And it just happens, it's like, oh, I developed this subdivision and yeah, look, I put irrigation in on all these little itty bitty pieces of turf and. Why?
Yeah.
Like where we are, it rains 55+ inches a year. You know. In a drier year.
because they want to establish that style, like you said, they gotta do it to establish it, but then they don't need it like that.
It's a full-blown paradigm of, you know.
Yeah.
The way things look in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, and you know, Tennessee that was brought down here.
Mhm.
And it is killing us.
Yeah.
If you go way back, it's part of our English heritage.
Yeah.
Your green grass is everywhere in England.
Yeah.
It's, but we want the same thing here.
Yeah.
Every piece of turf on Hilton Head has been trucked in there. Trucked over the bridge from turf farms in
Right,
Jasper and
Hampton
Hampton County. Yeah. Yes. Every single day.
Orangeburg's too far away.
Yeah.
You know, or they would sell. I mean, that's really funny.
Well,
But I mean, that is a nuclear thing.
Yeah,
You're talking about
may not like
people's,
that.
you know. So I don't know, I don't know.
well, you
Here's
see
the
that,
elephant in the room.
it sounds like you see that as a strategy, a long-term strategy to help control water use. I mean, how much more can your service area grow?
Ours not too much. I guess you could have some redevelopment.
Yeah.
I think we say another like 3,000 RUs is possible. On Wallingham.
And if all of those had ornamental landscape irrigation, which probably would, I guess, they were all built would that stress your system?
I don't know if it would stress it, but it would be creating a demand that you
Well,
would
if you-
otherwise have. It's non-essential.
If you did a moratorium on new ones, why couldn't you're not gonna rip them up out of the ground, but they're a metered connection, right? Why couldn't you take it away?
Not every irrigation, a lot of the irrigation runs off the household meter.
Oh, it's not separate.
Okay. Most runs off the household meter. Market. There are some, we have some. People stop doing that, it doesn't.
It wouldn't mean that you couldn't have grass. Because
Oh, you could.
drive along and look all along the highway, grass is growing on it.
Yeah. It just may not be
Edges and just
green during a drought.
You know, which grass.
I don't
want.
We don't have the.
I don't know if you've heard this. This is a quick little, I was contacted by the Municipal Association this week about this, House Bill 3656 this week. That
Yeah.
did get passed,
Is that on the well,
the well drilling,
it's terrible. Got out of committee
and it got passed.
just today.
According to what I heard this morning, it got passed.
This thing is awful.
Proposed amendment is what, and I guess this is, I don't know if it's completely past all of this, but so long as the property owners meets the setback, construction and other requirements under local ordinance or regulation, no county, municipality or water authority shall deny or prohibit the installation of a private irrigation water well, regardless of whether the property is connected to or served by a public water system. The irrigation water well shall not be interconnected to plumbing that is connected to any public water system and will be used for irrigation or other non-potable purposes only. For purposes of this section, irrigation water well shall mean any water well that is not interconnected to any plumbing connected to any public water system and that produces water that is used for irrigation or other non-potable purposes only. Non-potable purposes means irrigation, watering gardens, cleaning cars or residential areas, cleaning floors, flushing toilets, and similar purposes. Mary Catherine Lawton, flushing toilets is part of the sewer system, so that doesn't work. But I sent her an email and I said, number one, this is state's overreach of law, and we already have statute state that they have to come to us for permission for that. And but they supposedly already passed.
I don't think it's passed. I think it came out of committee yesterday. The water utilities as a state, we have opposed it.
Yeah.
Through the Water Utility Council and everything. It also, it would prevent DES from requiring connection to an available public sewer system if I wanna put a septic in. So I get to run around and they'll say, normally.
Was it saying bill?
Yeah,
There's
DES would say you
language
have to
about
connect to the public sewer, you can't, but this bill would say, no, I can put a septic in if I want to, and you can't.
Oh,
That's a big.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's a bigger problem.
that's a bigger problem. But anyway, so well drillers are, it's because they're losing money. They don't have anybody else to, there's nobody's putting a bunch of individual wells in it.
Yeah, I think it's a narrow problem that some ag maybe and some rural stuff is having, and they made the bill so broad. That maybe if they can narrow it to what the specific. But it's bad, it's a bad bill.
Okay. Well, going back to your idea on a moratorium, that seems to be pretty specific to Hilton Head. I'm not sure that others, I don't know if you or Jasper would ever want to do something like that.
Yeah, they would love it, I think, it's high, it's growth areas,
Yeah.
it's growth areas.
Mhm.
The demand is driven by this residential irrigation. It's not driven by what we're doing inside our houses.
Can there be an excess water use fee for new construction that installs irrigation? Which would approach it from a different viewpoint as far as moratorium.
Disincentivize it rather than
And
prevent it.
just say, if you're gonna have irrigation, you're gonna pay for it. And you're gonna pay a good bit for it.
Kind of like a capacity fee or
Yeah,
something.
and then I think you would get those builders to leave it out or say, okay, if this one wants irrigation, they're gonna have to pay a significant amount of money going forward for their excess water use fee. And I don't know if that's possible or not, but I agree there, that's I mean, where we are on Esto, nobody irrigates their water, but I mean, the grass, because water's precious and they can't get it to grow in that soil anyway without, saturating. But some try. And and also it'd be good to get them to stop irrigating the road, because a bunch of them water the pavement about as much as they water the grass. But that's another.
Yeah, there's some state laws about what you're allowed to build into capacity fees that might kind of.
Okay, well,
we get fumble that, but the point's the same. I mean, it's just a big elephant in the room. I don't know how we couch it here, but.
Well, in the context of growth, should we have an overarching acknowledgement of how our state is growing? So they just released data last week that for the second year in a row, South Carolina, as a percentage of population, is #1 in the country. That's kind of playing with numbers a little bit, but it ought to be recognized that, hey, we've got lots of new neighbors and lots more seem to be coming. And it's putting pressure on our resources here and our systems to accommodate the inbound growth of the state.
I'm 100% sure that's going to be noted in the state water plan in the introductory chapter as one of the drivers for the need for water planning is the high growth.
And in a way, some will say that it's playing with it, but it's not. Because if you look at it, that is very important, because you look at the size of our state versus neighboring state, Georgia, North Carolina, wherever. We are not nearly where they are as far as gross GDP a year.
Right.
And yet we've got that kind of population growth. So it should be, and that argument will be made, just what he said, that that's playing with numbers, when really it ought to be telling you that this is more important because of the total size of the state. And I don't know that that'll come out, but that's important. You look at total population, total GDP of North Carolina, Georgia versus us, it presents very big constraints on what we do. Prime example of that, look at I-95 in Georgia. We've got 200 miles there, plus Georgia's got 110. And same thing can be said for 26 and others, but the size of our state compared to our neighbors presents a significant issue, because it's just not that much gross revenue going there, and tax rates can be what they are. You're only going to pay based on some sort of gross revenue number. It presents a big problem, and that number right there that he just said is going to highlight where sooner or later there's going to be it's going to be like a runner hitting the wall. This is it.
Okay.
But John, do you think that this is a real problem. This irrigation, the fact that the irrigation demand is what is driving, particularly in our higher end developing areas. This water demand, which we may eventually have to struggle to meet. Would it make sense that highlight, that fact, that concept is highlighted somewhere in the plan, even if we don't propose a specific solution to it? That we basically make sure that that information is out there, that people can read it and understand it.
Yeah. I think we can work that into chapter 7, if not some other places, as one of the significant drivers and concerns for future water sustainability in the basins. Certain areas of the basin's high demand for irrigation, especially Hilton Head. So, I mean, Pete, if you're okay, we'll mention it in there. We'll just say it was an item of discussion and it's potentially something that could be encouraged as you move forward.
Yeah, I think you can fairly say and Southern Beaufort County or Beaufort County in general.
Right.
Same problem exists in Beaufort area, same problem exists.
It's all the way up the coast. I mean,
And all the way up the coast.
Yeah, anywhere there's high growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All that stuff they're putting in, that you mentioned down 17. I can guarantee you every one of those places has irrigation system.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good example. Any other strategies that we haven't already talked about that you would like to highlight? If you think of any others, we can come back to it. I'm going to move on for the sake of time and talk about the last one, which should be a fairly short discussion, which is industrial and energy conservation efficiency strategies. Got Brandon in the room. Brandon, we've kind of talked about some of these before in terms of power plants, energy users. Have anything to add on these? Do you think any of them are particularly useful or not particularly useful? We've never necessarily prioritized them in the other basins, but we've kind of listed them all as optional, or not optional, but as potential strategies to consider.
Yeah, this is Jeff Hines, representing the industrial. The water audits, is that mean like a water balance? How much water is coming in, what's going out? We're required by DOE now to basically conduct a water balance every year. And it does help you identify areas where you may have some problems, especially when you got 70 miles of piping to maintain. And then the other thing that we're finding is very helpful that we're still in the process of doing is putting in flow meters so that we know exactly where all the water is going in the plant or on the site. And that, certainly would be helpful inside of a manufacturing facility or such.
Okay, those are good. I'm going to add those to this first line item. Brandon, what else do you think? Anything or any thoughts on this list?
Some of the things you really can't change, and just looking at a high level, looking at power plants. Obviously, if you look at water recycling and reuse, say if a plant is closed cycle, which basically means you're reusing your water as much as possible. That's going to be if you see a cooling tower at a plant. So obviously you're doing what you can. The negative part of that is you've got a higher evaporation rate. So your true consumptive use is probably higher than if you've got like a once through cooling. You know, you're sending water in, it cools it, and immediately goes back out. So it's, you know, looking at terminology doesn't always, you know, one may not be better than the other. I think going forward with the trend now with these small gas turbine things that you put in for peak usage, they're going to use less water than like the old coal fire plants, things
Right.
like that. So I think you'll see an increase in efficiency there. But yeah, I mean, as far as kind of Jeff saying with the audits, you know, we're continually doing yearly flow data is being submitted, so that does help to pick up, and we're looking at it monthly. So you do pick up if anything's out of whack or you're actually losing water somewhere. But I don't know if any of that really fits into what you got there.
Yeah, no, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff. Did you want to add something?
I was just gonna say, one other strategy that we've talked about, we haven't really implemented yet, is rainwater capture. You know, we've got a lot of large buildings that have large roof areas. And being able to capture that water and then use it for irrigation, for example, is another strategy that, you know, when you've got a factory with a lot of roof space, you're going to have a lot of rainwater hitting it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Brandon, I was going to kind of build off of you mentioned meters, and actually Jeff did too. In the, you know, when we built these SWAM models, we would reach out to the utilities, to the energy companies, to get a better understanding of consumptive use. Because sometimes we'd look at the water withdrawal information and the discharge information, and there'd be a disconnect. We'd see more higher discharge in certain months than water withdrawn. And there's a huge amount of water going back and forth, and it's kind of hard to capture all that every month. So we'd have to kind of do averages and work with the utilities to figure out what do we really think the actual water use is. Do you think there's room for improvement by adding better meters or doing some type of different process to understand how much water is withdrawn and then how much is actually returned? There's also a lot of uncertainty in like stormwater ponds, and with some of that captured, and you know, we had to dig into that detail a little bit to figure out what was the real consumptive use amount.
Yeah, I think it's really more just doing a deeper dive into possibly the reporting. Because, you know, we'll have instances where our discharge will be higher than an intake.
Yeah.
But that may be because we're cleaning out a pond or something like that, and so we've got more flow going out. Sometimes stormwater can capture in there too. But and really it wouldn't be that hard for us to put that together. The difference between what we're really using, that consumptive use, because it's, you know, on some of the charts and all we've got, we're showing utilities as being a really high user.
Right.
But again, it's not a consumptive use. And so I'll be glad to kind of push that up the ladder.
Yeah,
it would help this process to really get a better breakdown of that.
Yeah, so it's not really I'm not sure this is the place for it. It's not a conservation efficiency strategy, but it's a way to better understand how much is being used and identify if there are opportunities to prevent waste or leaks or whatever. So.
Yeah, I mean, internally, yes, we obviously will have, you know, the APOs or the operators are continually going through the plants. They're looking for any leaks, making repairs. But short of that, you know, you're driven by how much power you're producing, really.
Yep.
You've got to have X amount to cool it.
Okay. Okay.
So,
go ahead,
I was just gonna add that one other thing that we do is we have pressure transducers all throughout our system to help us identify leaks. And so, you know, you see a pressure drop somewhere, you know something's going on and you can go check it out. And those are monitored more or less continuously.
Okay, good. Brandon or Jeff, are you comfortable if we just kind of list this all these general strategies and not prioritize necessarily any of them? That's mostly what we've done in the other RBCs because it's so specific to each industry or utility that we didn't find any value in trying to highlight one over the other.
Yeah, it's fine by me. It makes sense.
Okay. Anything else that's not on this list that you haven't mentioned that you think you'd want to include?
The block rates. Applied to industries as well. You don't really have any.
We don't have any except golf and food and beverage, but. I mean, I believe nationally, there's some.
I'm just thinking about from a process water standpoint. I don't know, I guess a lot of those might be negotiated. But you know, we have two commercial laundries. One that does all the linens for Hilton, and one that does medical linens, you know, so there are a lot, I mean, it would
Get some
a
more
lot
money
of it's
there.
part of their. They just thinking about how to promote conservation there when it's outside of their equipment, but you know, it almost discourages growth of their business if they're gonna grow and use more water, but we're gonna charge them more. You know, how does that?
Yeah, although I would imagine like industry is probably kind of a natural for inclining block rate because then they're able to look, you know, if it's going to impact their bottom line, then they're able to look at their processes and, okay, are we doing it as efficiently as we can? The whole point of that is to send price signals and, oh, is something wrong that you can fix? Is something, you know, is there equipment that you should have on that would prevent you from using more unnecessarily?
Yeah.
Like what Jeff's talking about with.
Right. Pressure
pressures.
transducers, meters, yeah. Okay. Okay, well, I appreciate all the discussion here. I think we have good information to put together a draft of chapter 7 based on your feedback and which strategies you have identified and eliminated and prioritized. So thank you for that. 11:53, we're going to break for lunch now. We'll go till about 12:15 and then we'll start up again. So online folks, we're going to start up in about 23 or 4 minutes, 11 or 12:15. We'll
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Good, it's recording. All right. Can't remember when, it was several days ago, a couple days ago, weekend, I did send out a couple of draft chapters. Asked that you review those. I just wanted to do a quick introduction to those chapters. The first one, and probably most likely of all the chapters in this plan, is just a description of the basin. So it's chapter 2. There's a lot of information in here that covers the geography, land use types, land cover, geology. The State Climate Office has written a section on climate. It's pretty substantial. Talks about droughts and climate normals and a lot of information that Hope Mazzell and Elliot presented to us a number of meetings ago. And they have a section on severe weather. So please review all that. Let us know if you have any comments. After the climate section is description of natural resources, soil, mineral, vegetative resources, fish and wildlife. A lot of that's pulled from the freshwater and marine presentations that Chris Thomason and others gave to us. And then got discussion on natural and cultural preserves. There's a listing of and a discussion of the 11 natural preserves in the basin that are part of the the Heritage Trust program. There is a map showing all of the conserved lands in the two basins. And then a discussion of ag resources and livestock. So prime farmland maps, livestock map. Some information from the Census of Ag on trends. By county, a discussion on irrigated acres and types of crops that grow. Silviculture, aquaculture, and then finally, just an overview of socioeconomic population and demographics from census. So a lot of information there. Please review it. Make sure you're comfortable with everything's there, with everything that's there and how it's presented. The other chapter that I circulated is one of the shorter chapters, chapter 8, which is on drought response. The first 3 or 4 pages are very similar for all the river basin plans because they talk about the State Drought Response Act. There is a multi-page table summarizing the drought response plans, which I think I handed out probably at the first or second meeting. And then we include your drought response recommendations, and you had 3 or 4 recommendations that we've included in this chapter. Short discussion on communication plan. So again, review that chapter, make sure we've captured everything from the discussions correctly and accurately. If you would rather have a PDF file instead of a Word file, let me know. I think sometimes folks that review on Apple computers have problems with the Word files, so they have to. If you do have comments, feel free to just email them or track changes in the Word document and send them back. I think I asked for these comments back in about 2 weeks or so. 21st, right. Probably before the 21st, we're going to be sending additional chapters to review. Chapter 4, which summarizes water demands, is almost ready. Chapter 3, which summarizes water resources, is pretty close, I believe. Chapter 5, which talks about the water availability modeling. We were just waiting on a piece from the folks at Clemson that did the ecological flow analysis to finish that one. That's supposed to be to us this week. So you'll start to see more chapters between now and the next time we meet. And I'll generally give you 2 to 3 weeks to review each chapter. In the other RBCs, not everybody sends us comments, but usually a handful of folks do. Not sure why I'm telling you that, other than I'd encourage you to read it. I appreciate your comments. This is supposed to be your plan. We're just putting your plan to paper. So we want to be sure that we're capturing the discussions and the consensus of the council. But I do encourage you to send me any comments that you have, whether it be markups or just comments in an email where you refer to a page or a whole discussion or whatever. Any questions about these chapters? Oh, one thing I'll mention too is we'll keep a comment log. So we'll track all the comments. We'll track how we responded to each one of the comments. And that's a little easier to follow when we send that back out to you to see if we've addressed your comment appropriately or not, rather than you have to look at each one of the chapters and find whether we addressed it or not. So we will circulate a comment log later on. Any questions? No. All right. Okay, let's get into a discussion of recommendations. So if you recall, we kind of jumped the gun, and because of Water SC, we started talking about policy, regulatory, and legislative recommendations back in, I think, November or December. And we got pretty well through that discussion. We want to circle back to that, but that'll be the last category of recommendations we tackle again. What I wanted to do today is start on the planning process and technical and program categories of recommendations. So the planning process recommendations can include, but aren't limited to, changes to how the RBCs are formed and the bylaws and how they meet and procedures, or how you communicate among RBCs and other groups. Funding for you to continue meeting. improvements to how the public outreach process or lack thereof occurs. And then an implementation. So anything that has to do with the water planning process. Doesn't have to be the RBC water planning process. You could make recommendations around the newly formed Water SC, if you would like, or any other group that you think may need to be formed or dissolved. But any type of planning process type of recommendation. So I circulated, let me pull it up now. I circulated multiple things. I sent you the actual chapter 9 from each one of the RBCs that have already developed recommendations. That was earlier. Within those, you could generally see the recommendations, which were usually in bold, and then some narrative behind each recommendation. So that kind of explains why the RBC made that recommendation. And then I think just 2 days ago, I circulated a more condensed list of the recommendations without that narrative behind them, just the bold part. And that's what I've put on each one of your tables. I'm not trying to steer you towards recommendations that the RBCs have already made, but I do want to circulate them so you can see where there's commonalities. It's been useful to do that with the Upper Savannah and the Saluda because they said, yeah, we completely agree with the recommendations the Edisto and the Broad and the PD have made, and we want to put forth those recommendations as well and hope that it gives it more importance in the state water plan. And SCDS and Water SC takes those recommendations seriously. So not in the ones that I circulated just yesterday, but in the one I'm showing on the screen, I've highlighted in yellow some of the recommendations that were common to multiple RBCs. So let's focus on the planning process recommendations, and a lot of the common recommendations kind of began with the broad. What I want to do is hear from you which recommendations that have already been made that you think are useful and should be included as a recommendation in your plan, or you may have a similar recommendation you want to make, but you want to adjust it or tweak it a little bit. In fact, we did that for some of our policy and regulatory recommendations that we made. We took some that the Upper Savannah and Saluda had made, but we revised them somewhat. So hopefully y'all had a chance to review these, and maybe you put an asterisk next to the ones that you thought were useful, but let me hear from you first before I look at these highlighted ones where there's commonalities. What planning process recommendations do you think are useful? And it doesn't have to be any of them on this list. You may come up with your own. In fact, I asked Gary and Ken, should we start with this list or should we start from scratch and let these come out organically? And we said, well, for efficiency's sake, let's send out the list, and that might generate ideas. So I don't want to limit you to just the ones that we're showing here. You may have great new ideas that no other RBC has thought about to improve the planning process.
One minor correction on there on number 2, 3, 4, 5. We've still got SCDNR on there.
Yep. That was
flip that over.
Yeah, when the Broad made that one, it was still DNR, so that's why it's listed that way. But if we were to adopt that one, we would change it to DES. So what do y'all think? Are there recommendations, planning process recommendations that you would like to highlight in your plan? You want me to start with the ones that have been repeated in multiple plans and see if there's support for them?
Wanted to and I'll just remember this from looking at them. One of the things that I did like, and I don't remember exactly where this was, but I liked the idea of having all the RBCs meet like maybe once a year in one general conference, whether it be a one-day, just a statewide Columbia type thing, whether it's about the state water plan or the whatever, we discuss about what's going on with it. I felt like that was a good, synopsis for whatever's going to happening with all the individual regional RBCs. I thought that was a good idea.
Okay. That's the one I'm highlighting here. Oh, no, that's not the one I'm highlighting here. That's a little different. In fact, I don't think the broad made that one exactly.
Somewhere, I
but the-
can't remember where it was, somebody said something about a state.
Yeah, here we go. The PD had one, Saluda and Upper Savannah, I think both had similar ones. Yeah, here's another one. Saluda had organized an annual coordination meeting of all RBCs, very similar to the annual statewide
Yeah.
meeting. Yeah. What do the rest of you think? Do you think that's a good idea or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was useful when we just met with the Upper Savannah, you know, so I can imagine it would be equally.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd suggest that along those lines is the continuation of the state funding for the program, for the process, in the RDCs. But I think we heard from some of the state staff that there was a break in continuity of several years. And that when this got refunded and restarted, it was needed, recognized.
Mhm.
But it was the lack of funding and it didn't allow it to continue from whatever 12 or 18, 15 years ago, whatever the time was. So continuity of the program, continuity of the effort is important and it requires some funding.
Okay, so the one I'm highlighting here, that was in the PD and it's a very similar one in the other basins you like.
Yeah, I was looking at number 6 in the broad. Legislature should continue to fund state.
That one, yeah.
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 Water planning activities.
What does everybody
And
think?
is that, I mean, because I know there's different, you're talking about the state water plan or that, and then this other water SC. I mean, what are, I guess I'm confused on exactly. I know each legislature comes up with their own little idea about how all this works, and I just wondered, like, he's saying, is there continuity with all of this? Is it gonna continue with each legislature and each governor? Is it gonna continue all down the line? Are we gonna continue working on the same type of thing, or is somebody else gonna come up, oh, we need to have another state water plan? And it gets changed up and it gets, all these new people get started over again.
Yeah, kind of like,
That's what I worry about,
Right.
is how,
so you kind of like when it was the PPAC and then that got
Yeah.
dissolved and then water and sea formed,
Yeah.
some of the same people, but some different people.
yeah, that's the
But a different
concern
charter.
when you have, yeah,
Mm.
that it's changing up something.
Mm.
And I'd like to see the continuity of it continuing instead of restarting over and over and over again.
Yeah. Dean,
I think a lot of that, and I completely agree. But one thing that I don't see in here is it seems to me that DES, in other words, they have a responsibility, in my opinion, to, and let's just say quarterly. I don't know what.
you say correlate? Quarterly, quarterly, yeah.
It would seem to me that a memo or report, short memo, report, something should be sent out to all the members of the RBCs, updating them on where they are implementing particular parts of the plan. In other words, there's got to be some kind of formal communication from the state, the implementing agencies in the state, out to the members of these task forces. If we sit here never hear a word from, the state about what they're doing with respect to the plan, what's being implemented, what's not being implemented, how it's been changed. It seems to me that this whole thing's not fade away.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to have some feedback coming back to all members of this, people that work so hard on this, so that they're continuing, they see it, oh yeah, what's going on? And so when the need comes for the opportunity comes for the annual meeting of the groups, their brains are still functioning, rather than kind of waking up and saying, oh, I forgot all about it.
Yeah. So once we're done developing recommendations, we're going to work on the last part of the plan, which is your implementation plan. And that's where we develop strategies and actions to put your recommendations into effect. And it's gonna fall on the RBCs to drive those implementation actions and strategies. Some of them will be DES strategies, like maybe you're gonna talk about increased monitoring and you'd like them to put in some more wells. That's not something that you have a lot of control over, but DES would take your suggestion. If they have funding, they would put in a well. But you'll see, at least from the other RBCs, a lot of the actions and strategies have to be driven by the RBCs. So it's not just hearing from DES, hey, what have you implemented? You know, we want you to implement our strategies. You're going to have to drive some of that stuff and push for your own funding or funding to go directly to, farmers to implement water management strategies or whatever it might be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It makes sense. It's a significant ask in a sense.
So
of the members, but it makes sense.
yeah, but both you and Lynn bring up a good point. I've heard that generally, I think this is the case. I guess I'd ask the question, does everybody agree that you would like the legislature to continue to fund water planning activities, including river basin planning?
I just want to make sure that the legislature understands what we're doing. Because sometimes there's a lot of disconnect on what we do in these types of things, and I don't know who's reporting it to the legislature. I don't know who's reporting it to them, and I'm assuming maybe someone at DES, I don't know.
Yeah, so the Eddystone made this recommendation. RBC members should communicate with legislative delegations about river basin planning.
That's what we need to do.
I mean, that's one thing that could be done. It come from the RBC themselves. I mean, John, you talked to or correspond with Senator Young, correct? Right. That's just an example of kind of Tom saying, hey, we've been meeting, he's asked for Senator Young to come speak with us. So you want to put that recommendation forth? I mean, that y'all are one of the last RBCs to be finishing up the process, but it's a good recommendation for the Santee to consider. And as you continue to meet, once your first plan is out there, especially, I mean, that's when it's especially important because you're going to want money to implement certain things. And to get money to implement certain things, you're going to want to do your own lobbying, right?
I got to recognize the status of individual RBC members. So I'm not the same as Pete. I'm not the same as a lot of other folks. And Pete's probably got a board and a municipal authority on top of him that may not view the same way direct communication with a state elected representative that I have. I'm kind of unbounded that way. So I don't know how you get at that, but I would, we're all still citizens, individual citizens, but we are representatives typically of larger entities. And they may have some interest in what gets communicated.
Like along those lines, I had written down that one thing be that the members be given a slide deck that we've all agreed, okay, this is the deck. And then we are encouraged to ask to go to whatever local bodies we think, should be presented to. I mean, I've got umpteen on the island that I could say, hey, I want to come, hey, town council, I want to come and give you guys this rundown of what the RBC, we all have.
Yeah.
But if we have an agreed upon deck, so that we're all just doing the same sheet of,
So that speaks to the recommendations about communication.
Yeah.
Right, the slide deck would be how we implement our communication plan, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and the
So
going to the
outreach,
engagement.
public outreach, right? Awareness about this plan, so that there is continuity.
Yeah. I mean, we could go so far as to maybe say, we're gonna take a couple of us and they are the spokespeople. So that if somebody isn't comfortable, say, but they make the contact and say, yeah, well, there's actually a spokesperson for the RBC, they'll come to the meeting if you want. And I don't,
Volunteer.
But I'm just saying, you know, if some members didn't, well, that's great. Thanks for the deck, but I'm not gonna go talk.
Yeah.
You
That has happened in other basins, like Catherine Amadon, the vice chair, is going to be given a presentation on what the Saluta's been doing at a upcoming Lake Greenwood Water Quality Association meeting. Harry Shelley of the Upper Savannah has done presentations, and he's asked for slides from us to be able to give just an overview. They've done it in the broad as well, so that's happened naturally. We're jumping around a lot of different things here, but a lot of the RBCs have put as in their implementation plan to actually develop a communications and a public engagement plan.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be detailed, like a 3 or 4 page thing that says, here's groups that we're going to target. Here's, if we're going to do social media, this is what we might do, but so they're going to do that as part of their implementation step, not right now, but they put a recommendation that other RBCs should do the same thing, develop a communication strategy, a public education plan as part of their implementation plan. So if that's something you want to do, we could include that as well. Let me jump back to the one I've highlighted here. Do you want that as a recommendation to encourage RBC members to communicate with your legislative delegations?
I think it's important.
Yeah, okay. And then we also touched on, this is kind of what Pete was just talking about. RBC members should be encouraged to present observations and outcomes at conferences or, wherever they're requested to come talk, something like that.
Yeah, I don't think that's what I did see that one. I was like, well, it doesn't have to be conferences.
It could be anything.
The county council, town council.
Rotary Club or whatever, yeah.
Well, down the Saluda, it says the Saluda will support and promote outreach and education to increase awareness of the general public around
Right.
water planning.
Yeah. Keep it general like that.
It be general and, it's both.
Let's just focus on the Upper Savannah since you share water resources with them. Let me just see which ones that we've already copied over are the same. They had one just about consider increased collaboration between all of South Carolina RBCs. I mean, one way to do that is the annual meeting. So I'm not sure if we need a separate statement there, but.
What about their first one up there about how we maintain membership and sustain this one, right? How we sustain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they especially focused on getting more elected officials involved and local government representatives. The local government group is one that's not always well represented on the RBCs. Usually there's only 1 or 2, perhaps. Who's the local government? Are you local government representative? You are.
I'm water and sewer and.
And local government, okay. Yeah, and theirs is more towards like elected officials, more like a county, town council level, actual decision makers.
Yeah.
Not that y'all aren't decision makers, but you know what I mean?
Better difference between city manager.
I think there needs to be something about. And it's not necessarily on this one, but it's said somewhere else about. The membership in the RBC, whether it's discussion amongst the RBC about, or outreach to the members, how they're feeling about things. Do they feel like they need to stay on? Are they getting out what they need to get out of it? Or do they need to step back or, work on their membership if they are continuing or they need to do something else,
Yeah. So, and this has kind of been a trend in many of the RBCs where we start out with a generally good agricultural irrigation contingent, but just because their time is limited and they've got other pressures, oftentimes their attendance is, they're not able to attend, basically. And in this basin, you kind of see that, you know, our some of our lowest attending members are the ag representatives, so we don't always have their voice. Is that kind of what you're getting to, is trying to ensure that we still have a
Yeah, 'cause I still think it's very important to
equitable
have
voice?
here,
Right,
now, at least have their voice
yeah.
heard.
So I don't know if we can think of recommendations to get around the fact that it's difficult for them to come during the day when, you know, they're busy with a lot of other things, as is everybody, but, you know, they don't often have somebody that can backfill for them. They don't have all the resources that a utility might have or something. So that's why they can't attend. So you may need a recommendation focused on how we meet or how we continue to get engagement from all the members. I'm just talking off the top of my head. I don't know what the solution to that is.
I don't know.
John, help me remember. The concept of the RBC. I don't remember that being created by the legislature. Was it not created by the DNR groups? In other words, the committee that put all this together, DNR. And so, to me, if the RBCs are going to be a player in the game, there needs to be a more formal, to me, a more formal legislatively recognized. They need to be recognized by the legislature as an organization which has some legal basis in the system, because again, if they're going to be asking for money from the legislature, if we're going to be asking for, you know, that money. I mean, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out that my main concern is that when we're done here, that what we want to have happen is for the RBC to stay together, to stay involved, and to be continually committed to making sure stuff that we wanted to have recommended be done gets done, and B, we're back again concentrating on improving, updating, and changing as needed. And to me, there has to be some kind of formalized leadership process. We've elected a chair and we've elected a vice chair. And the assumption, I guess, that we're making is those two people will be the ones that are responsible for making sure that everybody is communicated with on a regular basis. We schedule meetings, that we do this. We're not going to have you, I don't think, to be here with us. Are we going to have state agency staff that comes in the door and sits down with us? I mean, to me, these are questions that got to be answered here fairly with some degree of accuracy, because that's what it's going to take to keep this process alive. People will just kind of fade away if we don't have a formal facilitator, somebody who's in the top of their mind, and it could just be one employee in DES whose job it is to stay communicating, pushing, pulling, sending stuff out, asking for stuff.
RBC
I don't know,
coordinator.
To me, there needs to be some recommendation that you make formalize this
Okay,
process.
yes.
more than-
I mean, you might want to make a recommendation for DES to have a RBC coordinator, which are a position that includes coordination of RBC statewide.
I agree.
You had a couple questions nestled into your comment. Your first question was were the RBCs driven out of the legislature? I think they were a recommendation from the previous water plan that river basin planning be conducted. I don't know that it contemplated, I don't know if Scott's on the phone or Andy.
Andy, Brooke, stop.
Yeah, you guys chime in if I say something correct, but the 2004 plan suggested river basin level planning, correct? I don't know if it specifically mentioned river basin councils, but that's part of that answer. In Georgia, the regional plans, which are the regional councils, which are similar to our RBCs, are governor appointed. So that's where kind of the difference here. These are all voluntary, but there's drawbacks to that. The governor doesn't often appoint with very much frequency when people step off. So it can take years for a position to get refilled. It's kind of the same way with the DRC.
Yes.
You
Not
know,
much response. When you
yeah, it takes a long time to backfill those positions. So there's.
Hey, John,
Yeah, go ahead.
I probably can't give a complete answer, but so when the water planning was with DNR, and the, under the authority of the Water Resources Coordination Act, and I think that applies to DES now too. DNR was given the authority to put boards together or advisory groups together, hence the creation of the PPAC. And so then the development of River Basin Councils, the formal structure that, of course, came out of the PPAC. So the limited authority, if you even call it authority, that it has was just that DNR, for the purposes of water planning and developing water policy, they could put groups together like the PPAC to kind of guide that discussion. So then the RBCs in this planning process came out of that advisory group. That's about as far as you can take any authority, I believe. Yeah, I think it's already been mentioned, there's nothing legislatively mandated about a river basin council specifically, no. So does that help, Dean, at all? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding of it too, right?
Okay, just making sure, okay.
I just think that if we're gonna continue and do it successfully, it's gotta be formalized a little more, and whether that is something that DES does, or whether it's a piece of legislation, or whether it's a governor's directive or something, but it has to come from on high, some.
It's a good question. I agree.
We want a recommendation to the effect that DES should, this is coming out of my head. I want it to come from you guys, but got to give you something to react to. Should designate staff to coordinate. I mean, they do this now, obviously, but we're talking about after all the plans come out to keep it moving.
Continue to coordinate.
To continue to coordinate. RBCs and their
planning and implementation, meeting, regular meeting.
Yeah, coordinated support, ongoing RBC activities or something like that. It's just. Who keeps the records of the membership? Members change, how does that? It's gotta be more formal than it is. So I think that's a starting point, right?
Because it's pretty formal right now. We have facilitator, we have Thompson,
We have Thompson, we've got John, we've got.
DNR,
yeah.
But when does that end officially? When we're done with our plan, we don't see you anymore, right?
Right.
And how
How
long
do we implement it?
stay in it?
Same, we're
Yeah,
pretty
so-
much on the same schedule as CDM.
Right, so then we would expect, I guess, DNR to do something with it.
Right. And I think it'll be up to chairs to kind of continue to drive that. I mean, if the chair thinks, hey, we want to meet and start working on our implementation plan, then, you would try to push for a meeting and figure out, all right, is there a need for a facilitator? Can the chair facilitate, or someone within the RBC facilitate that? Or DES, or if you want to push DES for funding to hire a facilitator, that's all up to what you guys want to do,
Yes.
basically. There's a number of ways you can move forward. I mean, in the broad, we've had a couple meetings for implementation because there's a little bit of money left over. So we've kind of just continued on, but that's ended. And if they want to keep meeting and working on implementation activities, that would be to do it on their own or work with DES to do that or whatever.
But do they have a point of contact at DES? Do they?
Oh, sure. I mean, Scott and his group have been leading the charge for all the water planning, so. Yep. Okay, well, we've got a draft or a recommendation about DES should designate staff to continue to coordinate, and support ongoing RBC activities. I mean, building into that, we said number 2, the legislature to continue to fund state water planning activities. Do you want any other planning process recommendations centered around just the continuation of planning, frequency of plan updates?
Yeah, we say water planning was including RBC based river basin. So we articulate.
So you want to avoid somebody saying, I have a better idea, let's put together a working group of.
Or DES
whatever.
gets the money and decides to spend it, doing something that never tell us about it, never have any information of.
Okay.
I could just.
Okay.
Should we have something about water SC? Like water SC request to water, that water SC review, adopt, reject, request revisions of the RBC plan.
Consider or integrate the recommendations from the RBCs.
Yeah. Something.
Seems to me we're partnered with them, but we're not, it's not in writing strongly.
Yeah.
So I guess the assumption is that DES will write the state water. In other words, they're not going to, the water SC folks aren't going to sit down at the table and write the plan.
No.
They're going to rely on DES to write something, which they will then review and bring forward to the governor. I mean, that's the assumption I'm making. So DES actually will write the plan. So we need to make sure that DES takes what we've produced and uses that critically in the plan document.
So CDS Smith does have a contract with DES to help author the state plan. So our intent, and we've talked about this with DES, we've kind of gone over the outline of the plan and talked about what's going to go into the plan. A lot of that, in fact, like the first 4 or 5 chapters is basically pulling information from all the RBC plans. And we know those plans pretty well, having been working on all of them. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to capture RBC ideas and thoughts and recommendations and put them forward into the plan. It's still to be determined what role Water SC will have in reviewing the plan and improving the plan and what sections they're going to provide more input on versus less input. But my expectation is that they'll kind of use it as a way to review what the RBCs have done, and then they may have some direct input on recommendations that come out of the state plan, which build upon all the ones that you've come up with, including these planning process recommendations. Okay.
What about a recommendation about reviewing our membership? I saw several common
Yeah.
ones in there, just about making sure that all the
Yeah.
sectors or whatever we call them are represented, interest categories are represented and well attended.
So the Upper Savannah had one that specifically mentioned elected officials.
That's necessarily.
You don't think you necessarily need that?
I think it's just because I like the makeup of what they come up with before, right?
Yeah.
We already have. I just think it needs to be.
Or
You
you
just
think,
have to have something in there about. The
So it
makeup,
is pretty
the
good.
membership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so this is the Saluda one. Bring that one over.
I don't know, if we could need to tweak it or.
I'm not sure every 6 months is necessary, but.
Upper Savannah's, the first sentence, just develop a strategy for maintaining membership and sustaining the RBC. That's kind of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Would you rather have that first sentence from the Upper Savannah than this?
Well, I would just like to elaborate on it to say maintaining a membership with all interest categories. So I think that's important that we don't lose sight of
Yeah,
our stakeholders.
yeah, and the Saluda one
Yeah.
mentions that adequately represented.
But
across all
I like that the
categories.
Upper Savannah mentioned sustaining. I think that's what we've been getting at here is how do we sustain this? Because if it's not formalized, it won't happen.
How about I add in the word sustain that here, to review the membership to sustain and make sure all interest categories are adequately represented.
Yeah, I don't, yeah. I don't
Just say
know.
regular reviews,
Yeah, I guess our implementation plan can define how often we do it.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. What other planning process recommendations? See what else the Upper Savannah had that we don't already talk about. Do you want to specifically mention that engagement plans should be developed? I mean, that, again, it's gonna fall on you guys to put something together and to probably implement it.
Did we not have one similar to that out, did we say something about outreach? No.
We have communicating with legislative officials, support and promote education and outreach, but we don't talk about actually putting a plan together. You may decide you don't really need one, you just go out and do it, but that's up to you.
And you think the relationship with Georgia and the basin planning that Georgia is doing in the Lower Savannah needs to be dealt with in this part of the recommendation process or somewhere else in the plan?
I would put it under these planning process type of recommendations, right? So if you want to make a recommendation about coordination, collaboration with the Georgia councils, this is probably the place to put it. And I know the Upper Savannah made a similar recommendation,
Yeah, theirs was on the,
but maybe it wasn't under this category.
Thompson, like Kiwi, like Hartwell.
Yeah, they've got their stuff here.
Oh, that's education.
Yeah,
No, they've got. Is Tanya still on? It was her recommendation. Maybe it fell under technical and program. Sometimes these are overlapping.
Should,
might be a technical one.
No, it wasn't. Maybe it's under policy, which I didn't include in this list, because we're not gonna get to it today.
it's there somewhere.
But if we want to plan with Georgia, then it should be in this section. No?
Yeah, I would argue it should be this under planning process. Here, yeah. So
I would say, the RBC with the support of DES should communicate with the state of Georgia, Department of Natural Resources, to coordinate and communicate with the Georgia Savannah River Planning, Southern Savannah River Planning Commission, Savannah River Coastal Georgia Group, whatever it is, and it should be just some formal process where we have some communication, we know who they are, they know who we are. We could have a meeting and invite them, they could have a meeting and invite us. But there needs to be some formal.
okay.
Is there any discussion with the Upper Savannah and Georgia side?
The Savannah Upper Ogeechee
Yeah.
Council. There wasn't any direct discussion other than, well, Ashley Reed, who's with CDM Smith, is a co-facilitator for that one along with me, and she facilitates the Savannah Upper Ogeechee Regional Council for Georgia DEP. So we did give presentations and provided information to the Upper Savannah Council about their plan. talked about recommendations that came out of their plan and what they're working on, that type of thing. There've not been joint meetings or anything, but the Upper Savannah made a similar recommendation that they should have more collaboration and or joint meetings and somehow try to talk to each other, not just have separate planning processes that go on irrespective of what's going on the other side of the river.
Is this also a place to mention the inter IBC
It
connection?
can be, yeah. And that's something that we haven't done. We probably should have by now, but as you wink at me. I keep promising that we'll get an IRC meeting together, but then I keep debating on, well, is now really a good time? But should have just pulled the trigger and done it a while back. As we're developing these recommendations and while we go to finalize the plans, I do think we should get the two RBCs together, or at least the people that volunteered to be on the IRC, and look at your recommendations that you've developed independently together closely and make similar recommendations where you agree. So we'll try to do that in the next month or so. Okay, any other planning process type recommendations? There's no more. I'll move on to technical program recommendations. Okay, let's move on to technical and program recommendations, which could be a lot of different things. Need more data, like stream gauges and monitoring wells is the obvious one. Improvements to existing models. In your instance, the groundwater model, you made one recommendation about, getting it up and moving within a year or two or whatever is reasonable, and actually using it to evaluate future conditions in your basin. And you may want to make recommendations on how it's used. Any need for additional models that we haven't already covered to address specific issues. Better water use data. I gave one possible example of, sometimes there's some uncertainty in the energy water use and return data. But that's just an example. Technical studies, recommendations for technical studies to improve knowledge of specific issues. A lot of the other RBCs talked about better understanding how changes in land use impact the frequency and magnitude of flows in their basin. So they want to do some additional studies using different models, like rainfall runoff models, to figure out 40 years from now, if this area continues to develop like it is, there's a lot more impervious surface, is that going to significantly change the hydrologic flow regime? Are all of our streams going to be a lot more flashy and there's going to be less recharge? And what will that look like to both surface and groundwater availability? So they've got some recommendations intending to improve knowledge in that regard. More training for RBC members on specific technical elements. In-stream flow requirement information, that's been discussed in some of the RBCs, kind of leading to improvements to regulation and legislation around how you determine minimum stream flows and what's protective of ecological flow requirements. So those are all some ideas for technical and program recommendations. Were there any specific recommendations that jumped out to you when you reviewed the technical program recommendations from the Edisto or the Broad or the Saluda or any of them?
I wanted to bring up what we talked about last meeting about, and I know we talked about the difficulties of it, but something like a request to DES related to groundwater capacity, as opposed to just the demand projections.
So like a model, what are our aquifer, what are the capacities of our aquifers?
So
Some kind of statement from DES about how they view the capacity situation by aquifer.
So kind of like a water budget by aquifer, like, so, I mean, that's something actually when the Edisto, when they did US just did the modeling in the Edisto, they actually did kind of a aquifer budget. And we originally had included information on the budget by aquifer. Here's how much recharge the Crouch gets. Here's how much is withdrawn from the Crouch. Here's how much migrates from the Crouch to the McQueen. So we tried to paint that picture, but there was some uncertainty to it, and we ended up not including that in the Edisto's plan. But we did include the modeling results. What you're asking for, it sounds like, is you want a better understanding of overall water budget in each one of the aquifers.
It's like the discussion we had last month of, okay, well, this is the demand, but other than looking at like an impact of, well, a couple wells here went salty on Hilton Head, we don't have a statement from the state about how much do you think is down there that is usable by category of use and by aquifer?
Wouldn't that be?
We're
the
just
model?
talking about the demand projection.
I mean, to run a model, if you have demands, you have to have the supply, and so
Yeah, so that,
wouldn't completing the model
That is
by then?
yes, that's where the information would come from, is having a reliable and fully developed calibrated model. Then you use that model to develop a budget by
The
aquifer.
model would have recharge values.
Exactly, right. Yeah.
The Edisto RBC number 6.
What?
Not,
That is just 6.
Number 6 was study relationship between, oh, this was specific to drawdown and compaction, reduced aquifer yield. I mean, getting along the same lines, but yeah, it's getting kind of close to it, but it was, I think that one's a little different. Dean, you're gonna say something?
I guess my question is, it seems to me that the Edisto, for a number of reasons, is more closely related to our situation than some of the other basins. So if we look at whether it's the way the surface water flows through and what happens, it's not dammed, it's free flowing. The aquifer systems are basically the same as ours. We're in the same general aquifer system basis. I'm looking at the Edisto program recommendations. Climate projections, modeling analyses, duration of drawdown below the top of the aquifer, negative impacts, etc. It seems we really have a lot in common with that.
Right.
With that particular mix.
Yeah. So, I mean, just as a start, you might want to just say RBC recommends DES continue to work with the USGS to develop sub-regional or localized model covering the lower Savannah-Salkehatchie area, and use that model to help understand the water balance of the aquifers within the region, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally would like the word capacities to be in there, but yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that's the.
Yeah.
I guess the thing about an aquifer, it's not, I know what you mean about capacity, but the way it shows itself is with increased drawdowns, right? Well,
I mean, last month, Brooke, when we brought this up, and Brooke, she kind of put out there some thought about how it could be done.
Could or couldn't be.
Could.
Yeah. Brooke, is Brooke still on? Brooke, have you been following the conversation? Do you want to speak to Pete's point about using a model or identifying the capacity of each aquifer?
Sure. So we've talked about this internally before, but there's a lot of assumptions that would have to go into making an estimation of the volume of water available within an aquifer. And I wouldn't want to stand behind that in print, honestly. So you would have to think about it, what's the porosity of the aquifer and its its thickness and its depth, and then make an estimation of how much water would be present in there. But that is not going to be homogeneous across the entire aquifer, because there's going to be heterogeneity in the porosity due to the presence of confining layers or just areas of lower permeability or that. So while it's possible and we could talk about it, it would not be something that I think that DES would want to stand behind printing that there's this much water within an aquifer available for use. So I think from an academic, desktop kind of activity, it would be fine to quantify, but I don't think that I would not want to go down that road. And I would prefer to wait for a model that could do that by estimating, each unit within the aquifer, each unit within the model, and giving an estimation and then summating on that, if that makes sense. So while we could do it, I think it's dangerous to assume that, because that information could actually be misconstrued by a user and say, oh, we have this much water, when we might not have that much usable water, even if there is water there. Does that make sense?
Does. I mean, to that end, should we have some kind of recommendation then that the RBC requests some kind of acknowledgement from DES that while demand projections exist, solid information about potential capacities does not? Because that's kind of what we're saying.
It is kind of what we're saying, and I just would hate to put anything in print and in a plan that we couldn't support with data. And I feel it's an estimate that we would be giving, and it wouldn't be something that you could regulate on or depend on. So I would really just want to err on the side of caution and wait for a model to make those kind of assumptions. But I do agree. I think that it's an important metric, and it would be nice to know how much water is in there. But I just don't think, I think there's too much uncertainty in how we could do it right now by just kind of hand waving to put that in writing in a plan. But my recommendation to get that model done, we all want the model done, so that we can have more certainty about the sustainability of the groundwater.
Well, maybe we should just, really push for the model. I mean, that's what we want. That's what we want.
Yeah, that's the
Model.
solution. And I guess, like we have right here, like in the interim, there is an acknowledgement that this otherwise does not exist.
I hope that answered your question. I know it wasn't really an answer, but that's how I would interpret that.
Yeah, go ahead.
From Lawrence Larry. Hayden, estimate the index of biotic integrity or similar exploring measure for the Salkehatchie River within 5 years of plan approval as a baseline for this basin, which has fewer environmental impact than other basins. The scoring for this river is poor. Determine the root cause and use this information to assess other stream regions.
Let's come back to that one in just a minute, because that's getting on a different topic, but I do want to revisit that. So for your suggestion or recommendation, do you still want to include capturing better understanding of the capacity of each aquifer, or do you want to just focus on, let's encourage that DES work with USGS to get this local groundwater model built like they are doing for the PD and apply it per the original planning framework to look at future projections?
Areas of concern,
Identify areas of concern, right?
Yes, I mean, I think we need that. I guess I'm just asking, do we also need just some type, like I've said, some type of a recommendation that there be an acknowledgement of the current lack of lack of understanding of the potential capacities.
What do the rest of you think? Do you want to
I don't know if
Put
that
a-
matters to others or not.
recommendation in there that?
I think it all goes back to the model. I think that's where the lack of understanding comes from, is because we have a lack of a model. We don't have a model.
Can they not do it using the coastal plain model? They don't have to use the inset model, do they?
I think the plan was to do inset models.
Right.
And I don't remember exactly how many, but they used the coastal plain model for the Edisto. I think going forward, the plan was to use inset models because they run a lot quicker and they can be a little more detailed, better spatial resolution.
This is Brooke again. The coastal plain model is currently being revised because there was some uncertainty in it, and so the USGS and we do not want to use the coastal plain model until it is fully calibrated, and they're working on a full calibration, and so that should be done soon. But right now we are just purely in a waiting game.
Once the full coastal plain model is calibrated, then they can develop these inset models. And is the current plan to start with the PD and finish that before they would move on to lower Savannah-Salkehatchie area?
Yes, I do believe that is still the plan because that was the order that we were doing it before.
Yeah. Is there funding in place to actually do each of those, or is that contingent upon further funding? Or do you know?
I do not know, and if Scott's on, maybe he can answer that, but I'm just not sure exactly how the funding stream works for that.
John, the contract with the USGS includes 3 inset models, which would be the PD, lower Savannah-Salkehatchie, and the Santee. So it does include 3.
Okay, I was just asking about funding and thinking that maybe if it's funding hasn't been identified, you want to add to your recommendation that funding be provided so that they could continue to do the groundwater modeling. But it doesn't sound like that's needed. It sounds like you have a contract in place.
We do.
Yeah, okay. Okay. All right, we'll try to capture that we may reword that recommendation a little bit, but we'll kind of capture the essence of that discussion. Okay, I think Larry then had a recommendation, and let me
Can you pull up the chat and just copy and paste it?
oh yeah, that's what I'll do. Okay, Larry had a recommendation: estimate the index of biotic integrity or similar scoring measure for the Salkehatchie within 5 years of plan approval as a baseline for this basin, which has fewer environmental impacts than other basins. If the scoring for this river is 4, determine the root cause and use this information to assess other stream reaches. And Larry, do you want to speak to that?
Why the internet is spotty, but he's willing to unmute.
Okay, yeah. Why don't you unmute and see if you can give it a chance? And if we can't hear you, we'll let you know.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yep, we can.
Okay, so, from the environmental standpoint, what the condition of these waterways are very important. And I had a hard time trying to track down any real statistics on the index of biotic integrity. We had a presentation about that, and I contacted that author, and he wasn't exactly sure how much calculations or determinations of that biotic integrity there are in the river basins. So I would like to have like a comprehensive determination of biotic integrity across all the, both the river basins that we're assessing here. But I'm thinking that just like trying to do one waterway and get that scoring for that that one waterway would be, just inroads into here's how we could actually get those determinations for the scoring of the condition of the environmental aspects of those waterways in place. And there is a time frame, like a 5-year, in order to try to make it an actionable item. And then if it's poor, then if it's poor on the Salkehatchie River, then we're in trouble. But if that's the case, then we should look. We should check and see what's going on with the environment around it. So that's kind of it. I'm not sure. I tried to go back to see if we had the biotic integrity calculated for all the waterways, but I wasn't able to fish it out. But it may already be there. It may already be there. So that's my consideration.
Okay.
They had loaded data, didn't they, when they did that, Brandon Hills.
Yeah, so for their,
Basically, when they include the 8 in one area.
right, the Luke Bauer and Brandon Peoples, who are talking about the ecological flow relationships, which is, I think, different than, well, one of the same measures, but it's a different concept than biological integrity. But I'm not completely familiar with what all factors into the index of, biotic integrity. Does anyone else on the council know much about that?
Just reading, Googling it.
And Larry, I don't know if you know or have a definition for biotic integrity and what measures or elements go into it. I'm assuming it's
Basically,
both.
biological community and how it supports itself and maintains balance of species.
Mhm.
Measures biotic integrity, measures the structure, composition, and function of a biological community. It also assesses how well the community can resist and recover from disturbances.
Okay. And it's not specific to quantity or quality, it's probably comprehensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, what I was in my discussions with them, they said that it's difficult to do, and so it usually is not done. But it's like, well, maybe we don't try. I mean, shouldn't we try it in one of the river basins across South Carolina on just a segment and see how difficult it really is, and maybe we can use it or an offshoot of that measure in order to kind of have a scorecard as to how well the environment, the actual, the environmental aspects of these waterways are doing.
So, I mean, this was in the flow ecology, bioassessment, and the article that he referenced, I don't remember what he said, was assessment of biotic integrity using fish communities. And I mean, I remember his presentation was, we have too many streams for people to monitor. So what we do instead is we use our aquatic organisms that are out there to help us learn about the health of the rivers. I think lack of data is an issue, not only here, but also in our aquifers and our monitoring wells and so forth. So I would agree that we need to gather more data as far as specifically how. I refer back to the experts that, talk to us on this, but and I don't disagree that we need more data. I just don't know.
Right, but that's why, just identifying one waterway or segment of one waterway over a time period, say within 5 years, just as an experiment, a test, to see if we can get a measure of how well the environment, a comprehensive scorecard of how the environment is doing. So that's why, not trying to do it everywhere, but someplace in a specific time. That's kind of the proposal here.
Right, basically a demonstration, a pilot kind of, just to see if there's merit to using the biotic integrity index elsewhere and across the basin. Yep.
Yes, that's
So
it.
what does the rest of the RBC feel about that? So again, remember this first phase is water quantity, and then kind of it's up to the RBC to decide as part of future planning, do you want to tackle water quality issues or issues like this, which are impacted by both quantity and quality. So it's certainly something that if you all agree could be done as part of your implementation plan over the next 5 years. Any thoughts?
I think it's a good idea. I'm a little more focused on the immediacy of the fact that in the Salkehatchie and Coosawhatchie,
Yep, speak up a little bit.
the Salkehatchie and Coosawhatchie, which are all forming part of our planning area. These are very, very low flow streams with an enormous amount of wetlands. They're different. They're different from any other stream that we're doing this type of planning on in the state. And they're vulnerable because they're very rural. They're in areas of rural communities where the regulatory processes which might protect against bad development are fairly weak, not strong. So I think I would like to see some kind of a recommendation with respect to these streams that extra precautions, something extra precaution should be taken by DES, particularly when considering any withdrawals, permitted withdrawals from streams in these two basins. Not worried about the Savannah, I'm just worried about the Salkehatchie and the Coosawhatchie. I'm trying to figure out how to express it, because it does seem to me that these are unique in the state of the work we're doing. The Edisto was similar in a way, but another no impoundments, nothing, but it's a much bigger stream, a lot more water moving through it. These are relatively small. We want to protect them for the agricultural users that are using them. We want to protect the environments around them. I'm just trying to come up with a statement that will push that issue up front and say, be careful, be real careful.
Okay. And what you're suggesting, I think, is going to fall under the regulatory legislative policy category, but it's a point well taken. If you remember when we looked at minimum in-stream flows for Coosawhatchie or that area, remember we had like up to 45%, 50% of the time, the minimum in-stream flows were dropped below the minimum in-stream flows just because of the strange flow regime in those systems.
Hydrology is just.
Yeah, and how do you even apply the standard 20, 30, 40 regulation there? If somebody wanted to withdraw, half the time they'd have to curtail their withdrawal because they're below the minimum stream flow. So it just doesn't work there. I think that's kind of your point. It is very unique. So let's come back to that one when we finalize our policy discussions. So I'll try not to forget that one. Remember, we had a green bucket, yellow bucket, red bucket approach where we talked about something, but we couldn't come to consensus on it, or we need more information. I'm saying just to keep things moving, Larry, if you're okay with it, maybe we put a yellow bucket next to your recommendation. We revisit it at the next meeting. And in the meantime, we might. Well, you said you reached out to Brandon Peoples and Luke Bauer. Those are the folks you talked to that came to some of our meetings before and talked about the ecological flow requirements. Was it those two?
That was Brandon.
Brandon, okay. Would it be
I'll reach it back out to them. That's fine. Yellow Bucket is fine. I'll see if I can get more information about it.
Okay. I think in the room here, I think we just don't have a good understanding of it. That's why we're hesitant to chime in on whether we think it's useful or not. So,
Yeah.
um,
Many months.
Right.
Too.
and I do remember they just had a lack of data, which was one reason they couldn't really do their ecological flow analysis, at least in the Salkehatchie.
Right.
Yeah.
And because there was a lack of data, maybe we do need a recommendation like the one you've proposed, or just a recommendation at least first to get data needed to develop some type of ecological measure. And maybe Brandon has a good recommendation that he might suggest to you that we start with. So perhaps that's a question you pose to him, is what would he recommend we do to better understand ecological flow relationships and the health of the system, especially in the Salkehatchie.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
It's kind of like the issue you ran into with the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Yeah, it is. Yep. Up in the Blue Ridge, the Saluda recognized they didn't have good data there, and we talked for some time about how to build better ecological flow relationships in that part. Okay, what other technical and program recommendations would you like to consider?
I had 6 from Saluda that I just circled. I don't know why I was so drawn to Saluda.
Support continued efforts to maintain and expand stream flow gauges. Is that it?
I had Saluda 3, Saluda 9, Saluda 12. Saluda,
That's a little bit too.
okay, and 13, 17, and 20.
Okay, well,
I was going nuts on Saluda.
you were. Well, let's start
I've
at
never
the top.
I've never been there. Maybe I should go there so we get to that.
I think 6 is included too.
6. Okay, well, you started with mentioning 6. Y'all want to support continued efforts to maintain and expand stream flow gauges in your basins. Yeah,
Was 6 the number? Or did he mean 6 total from Saluda?
he was talking about the number. Yeah.
I circled it.
Yeah.
Cause that
Yeah.
was something
But
we
yeah, that's
definitely don't
yeah.
have enough of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, in the Salkehatchie, we talked about the challenge of putting in gauges to actually be able to measure the flow. It's just difficult since, as Dean described, it's spread out and more kind of like a big wetland in areas. And how do you can't do a stage storage or a flow duration curve, you know what I'm saying, a stage discharge curve over 3,000 or 300 feet, in a swampland.
How'd y'all handle Floral Swamp? Wasn't that a similar issue in Edison?
Yeah, I mean, there is a gauge there, but I think there was question about the accuracy of the gauge and but that doesn't apply everywhere in the basin. So which other ones, Pete, did you say? And Lynn, I think you said 2. Did you have 2?
I wasn't sure about 2. I just wondered about the
future development part?
I think that's a good.
Yeah.
Two.
population. I mean, just scenarios, the SWAM model and things like that. I just thought.
What is the rest of the RBC? Do you think that there's, in the next planning phase, need for expanding the type of scenarios that you look at?
I think that's good.
I think 2 from that, if I remember correctly, is that the one where impoundments are just ignored in the model? Like they're not in there. I think adding those, especially if we're gonna add scenarios, would be very helpful.
Yeah, so right there's many small impoundments, especially in the coastal plain, that aren't in the model. Now, I mean, potentially they could be. I might argue that they would be the application and usefulness of adding all those in should be suspect, I guess, primarily because we don't, well, I guess the dam safety program does have an estimate on how much water is each one of those impoundments. But, when we put a reservoir in the model, we like to have a bathymetric survey. We know how much water is in the reservoir under different conditions as it drops. That was the surface area change, that impacts evaporation. There's a lot more uncertainty with those small impoundments, not to say though, we couldn't come up with an estimate based on,
Maybe there's a threshold.
yeah,
I just remember one of the examples was one of the streams were low, but there's a low chance, and by the way, they also have an impoundment. So
right.
It'll probably be okay.
Exactly. That's kind of been the stock answer in all the basins because there's so many impoundments that we didn't include in the model. Then there's these small users that have very infrequent shortages, but we expect those impoundments are helping them get through those shortages. But it's certainly something that could be expanded upon, and we could increase the usefulness of the models if we picked a minimum size or something. Well, would you like me to put this one in number 2 or something similar to it?
It's a value added.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well. I think we need to continue to examine our models and our changes.
Okay, Pete, you had some other ones that you were.
I liked. I mean, some of these actually, I guess you could argue they're quality related, so I don't know. I like number 3 of theirs.
Yeah, so.
But you could argue that's kind of about quality, so should it be here?
I think what they're saying is in the future, it needs to move towards quality.
Right, so nearly all the RBCs said there's some aspect of quality that they wanted to work into their deliberations. The broad focused on like the Enoree River where there's a lot of discharges, and is quality and quantity an issue in that stretch of the Broad or that portion of the Broad. The Saluda and Upper Savannah were focused more on like DO, bacteria, nutrients, sedimentation. If you put in a recommendation on quality, I'd encourage you to kind of say, here's what we want to focus on because we think it's worth studying.
I think nutrient would definitely be a thing for us. I don't know about sedimentation.
You don't really have reservoirs. You have small impoundments, and sedimentation could be an issue for farmers, particularly that could maintain their storage volume in those impoundments. I just don't know if it's a problem or if they're concerned about it.
The other thing to remember is
Big a deal for us.
that the streams that we're dealing with here, excepting the Savannah, flow into 2 of the most pristine and important impoundments in the state. I mean, not impoundments, but
Bays.
estuaries.
Yeah,
in the state.
estuaries.
Between the Ace Basin and the Fort Will Sound, you've got 2 enormously important and high quality estuaries. So the amount of water coming into those is not really a crisis, at least for these 2 streams that we're dealing with, the Salkehatchie and the Coosawhatchie. The amount of water is less important, probably in the long run, than the quality of that water. If there's something ugly going on in these basins and polluting those streams, it's going to have a real impact once you get down into those estuaries. The volume of that water, it's so small relative to the capacity of the estuary that it's not as critical.
Okay.
It just means the salt water will move a little further upstream, push its way in.
So maybe just a recommendation about looking at
Nutrients.
future water quality, including nutrient loading, take out the sedimentation.
I think so.
Okay. Is anyone opposed to that? That did bring up in other RBCs a lot of discussion. Some folks felt like, no, even after this first plan, these RBCs should only focus on quantity related issues. Quality is already covered in DES's watershed-based plans.
But it doesn't hurt to remind them of it.
Doesn't hurt to remind them.
I mean, I kind of see that side of it because and we have a lot of unknowns as it is, just focused on quantity and. You know, if we want to do quantity really well, then there's something to be said for focusing on quantity. I'm not saying quality is not important, but
Yeah.
you get too broad, then, you know, are you really doing as good of a job as you need to with quantity? So.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, go ahead.
I think that's a fair point.
Yeah.
It same speaks to that, to number two there. I mean, it's a great idea, but are we getting a little off? What our charge is here.
Personally, I don't think we ought to take sedimentation now. I mean, because that's happening everywhere, whether we like to measure it or not. Because people tell me on the salt that there's places that they used to be able to get a little boat, they can't get it there anymore. And now I have no scientific basis for anything other than some guy couldn't move a boat. But I don't see where it hurts to lead it. I mean, if somebody does, if one of the technical people says that
More kids.
because of where we are, we need to leave out sedimentation, okay, fine, but I don't see where it hurts anything not to have it in there.
Okay.
And we're having a loss of open water all over Edison. And don't know why, but marsh grass is taking over and choking off creeks and other open water areas. Now, why? No one has said so yet, but it's been happening for the past 3 years at a remarkable rate.
Eutrophication.
And so personally, I don't think there's I just say leave it in, but I don't want to be one to, you know, harp on something where somebody keeps it in just because I'm talking about it.
Maybe we subhead a couple of these, John, as being quality, you know, we understand the quality related, however.
Say that again.
Maybe we subhead in our recs that, you know, we bring more to the top our recs related to capacity. As is our current, but leave these in, but just subhead them as these are quality related.
right, with the premise, like what Dean said, we have some very unique rivers. We,
Yeah.
you know, water quality is important in our river basin. And while it
Yes.
wasn't the
Right.
focus of this plan, we recognize that it needs to be someone's focus,
Yeah.
whether it's this group or.
Yeah.
They are interrelated. You lose the quality, you're gonna lose it, but
Right.
you're gonna know.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we'll address the kind of prioritization, which is what you're getting at in the implementation
Yeah.
plan. That's
Okay.
where we
Okay.
have strategies and actions to study water quality, but we can put it as a low priority.
Yeah.
So we'll do it then.
What about, we have stream water gauges. What about, I think Brooke had recommendations on black,
She did.
gate data gaps.
Monitoring well.
Yeah.
Monitoring wells.
I feel we need, I don't know what that, she might be able to help us on that recommendation, how to write it, but I think that should be in there.
Yeah, Brooke, you specifically pointed out some areas, I think in the middle part of the basin where you didn't have a lot of information in certain aquifers. Did you have a suggestion for the RBC with regard to recommending monitoring wells?
I did make the suggestion, yeah, to add some monitoring wells. I don't have. Are you looking for me to write this second? I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared for that.
No, just
but-
general. Yeah, just was it the middle of the basin that was generally
Yes, so generally where we're lacking data is in the middle of the basin in some of the deeper aquifers. You know, we've historically not had very much information there to characterize, you know, any changes in water levels. So that would be a great location to propose to add some wells. And you know, Mr. Oswald had shared his contact information with me at the end of the meeting that, you know, we could pick up a few measurements from him to investigate his wells located at JCO Farms. But what would also be fantastic is to
So there, Brooke?
Yeah, it'd be fantastic.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Brooke. If we lost you, we can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear us, but. Okay, well, central part of the basin's deeper aquifers, I'll try to get additional information on what she was suggesting. We're coming close to our time here. We have gotten through planning process recommendations. I think there's probably still a few more technical program recommendations we need to flesh out. Let me pull up our big schedule. Let's see, those are policy recommendations. We have some parking lot ones we need to talk about in policy, and we've added a few to that list based on some discussions today. I think at our next meeting, at the pace we've been going, we'll hopefully get through our recommendations discussion. So I envision we'll probably spend at least another hour finishing off the list of technical program recommendations. And then we do need to revisit the planning policy regulatory recommendations. So we'll use March to do that, and then we'll probably start on the implementation plan. What we'll probably do is take the planning process recommendations that y'all have developed and begin to put those into the implementation plan and use that as a starting point. We usually don't start the implementation plan until we have all the recommendations down, but given that we'll probably finish with recommendations in the next meeting, I think we'll go ahead and start working on the implementation plan and try to work through that as much as we can. Finish it in April. As a reminder, I hope y'all, if you want to go on the April 22nd SRS site tour, have gone back to the website, put your information in. If you haven't, you still have plenty of time to do that. But don't, and Jeff, is Jeff still on?
Yes.
Jeff, was there, I think before there was a window of time that we had to have our information in if we wanted to go on the tour. Is it like a week or two?
About a week before.
A week before, okay.
Yeah, a week before you should be fine.
Okay, we have plenty
earlier obviously is better, but
right.
We'll be good.
Okay, and if you need that link again to be able to register, you have to register and put in your information. Let me know and I'll send it to you. But assuming we can stick to this schedule, we will be presenting to you a draft of the executive summary and hopefully a full plan by May. That means we're going to be having to get a lot of interim chapters to you for review, and you need to get your comments back to us between now and May. So we'll try to keep feeding those to you, and we'll look for you to provide any comments in a timely fashion.
John, do we have any more commitment on June, July, August specific dates, since that's starting to get into vacation time?
Other than just the first Thursday of the month.
Okay.
And we can start to pull RBC members come like May. If that first Thursday is going to result in low turnout, then we could consider adjusting them. The June or July meetings, we could end up doing them virtually if we've pretty much covered everything, and all we have to do is address some final comments and make sure everybody's comfortable with the plan, and then do our 1 through 5 vote on the draft plan. In other councils, we've done that just virtually over like a 1-hour meeting.
That would be
That would be like June or July, or maybe both even. So we might not need to meet in person if we only have limited number of agenda items to cover, which would include, addressing your comments on the plan and doing a final vote on the plan before we release it to the public.
Brooke is back. Do you want to hold her till next time?
Let's try to finish the thought. Brooke, you were starting to say something about the monitoring, and I can't remember where you left off, but then we lost you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. What we can do is provide some areas, if that would be helpful. We'll work on that and we can have that ready for the next meeting. But I was saying that's we would prefer to have continuously monitoring wells, whether those are wells that are being retired, that were production wells that would be in a good condition that we could take over, or if we drilled dedicated monitoring wells that were open to a targeted area in the aquifer that we were lacking information. And so that's what I was saying. But we can get back for next month and talk about locations specific that we would want to do that, if that would be helpful. Typically the model will point out that information by running the scenarios, but obviously we have to kind of estimate where we would see potential areas of decline or groundwater areas of concern. So I can make a plan to work on that specifically for the next meeting if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think it would. I think the more specificity we can add to our recommendation and then our implementation plan, the better. So,
Okay, well, maybe we can make a couple map images and show those areas and say, we want a well here in the Crouch branch, we want a well here in in the McQueen branch, and that would help visually for the RBC, and we could get it down in writing.
great. All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As far as the schedule, I looked, I've got us booked up until June with our regularly scheduled meetings and the planning team calls. So is that good for now, or do we need to kind of extend that until August? The July one would be July 3rd. So I don't know if we.
Yeah, we probably
I don't
wouldn't
want to have it.
do
Even if it was virtually, probably.
it's 30. Yeah, we probably wouldn't do that. That'd probably have low turnout.
I don't want to wait.
So let's wait. Well,
We're on the calendar till June.
yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Fine with me.
Okay. That's always good to remind me of that.
I know.
That's the beach house weekend.
Yeah.
John, in terms of the public meetings, will both those meetings be in the same place, or are we gonna try to move them around a little bit? And they're in person, I'm assuming, not online.
Yeah, no, we've always tried to move them around in other basins. There has been some talk about maybe only doing one public meeting, but at least that's been for the Santee and maybe the PD, but we have scope and budget to do 2 public meetings. And if you all feel strongly we should do 2, we'll continue to do 2. But I think the idea would be to move them around a little bit just to try to get better attendance.
Yeah, well, we have 2 very populated
Yes,
areas on either end of our
Yeah.
Right.
basin. It would
To
make
have
makes sense to.
Yeah.
either somewhere in Aiken and somewhere close to something like that.
Yes, that makes sense. Okay. We'll talk more about that. And that's the other thing we need to work into this schedule we don't have is that when we have these public meetings, we generally give a presentation and ideally the RBC is the one giving the presentation. So with the broad, there was probably 5 different RBC members that spoke, including the chair and the vice chair. And then 2 or 3 others. So we kind of let you all be the spokespeople. I think I spoke on the modeling portion, but that was it. But we will talk about the public meeting presentation probably in May. In fact, we'll probably start to put together a draft of slides that we suggest you use, and you can tweak them, but we'll look for volunteers to potentially speak to certain parts of the presentation. It's 30 or 40 minutes at most, I think. At least that's what we've done before. We could always change it up, but.
What type of venue works best?
Well, like kind of where we had the original public meetings. So we had the one at the Wildlife Center in Walterboro, that would work well. I mean, honestly, they have not been greatly attended in the other councils for the other basins. So we don't need a huge space.
Sure.
So any venue of this size would work.
Council chamber?
Council, well, depends on council chamber size, but usually they're big enough, yeah. I mean, there's some that are pretty small.
Yeah, well, yeah, but they also tend to come facilitized, so.
Right. Spartanburg, we did one at the Emergency Operations Center, which is nice because they had all these big monitors all around and you can see from anywhere in the room. But we'll work. If you have suggestions where we should go, that'd be great. I mentioned this before too. I want to ask if y'all have pictures, and Gator Bill sent me some. If y'all have pictures from the basin that show anything related to water, I'd like to have those so we could include them in the executive summary. Keep thinking about that. And if you have some, email them to me. I've got some from our field trip, but I'd like to have more, especially like ag photos and anything that you can think of.
I got lots of pictures of the Coosawhatchie.
Yeah, I don't have any of the Coosawhatchie, so send me some of those. And I will credit you as a photo journalist as well.
I don't need
The critters in them or not? Bill's all.
Wastewater district.
Before we adjourn, anybody have any other comments or questions? No, well, thank you all. Appreciate it. We'll probably have the meeting again here next time if everybody's comfortable with this venue.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep. Okay, that'll be the plan. And I'll work with Scott and Tom to make sure we get it reserved. All right, thank you, everyone.
All right.
Adjourned.
Take care.
Except it runs out like this.